the silence after my words was deafening. Around the mahogany dining table where I'd endured 28 years of criticism, my entire family stared at me in shock. Mom's fork hovered halfway to her mouth. Dad's wine glass trembled in his grip, and my successful siblings looked like they'd seen a ghost. How does it feel knowing this useless one won't be paying your bills anymore? I'd finally said what needed saying, but what happened next would change everything I thought I knew about my family forever. My name is Vivian, and every second Thursday of the month, our family gathered at Romano's, the upscale Italian restaurant where my parents loved to play their favorite game of making me feel small. Tonight was no different, except for what I was about to discover. The mahogany table gleamed under the warm lighting as my father, Harold, adjusted his vintage cufflinks, a remnant from better days, when his antique store actually turned a profit. My mother, Patricia, smoothed her designer blouse, the one she'd owned for 5 years but treated like a new purchase every time we went out. They maintained their facade of success with the dedication of seasoned actors. "Vivian, dear, you simply must do something about your appearance." Patricia began, her voice dripping with practiced disappointment. "That thrift store cardigan makes you look like you've given up on life entirely." My brother Marcus nodded sagely from across the table, his law degree giving him an air of authority he wielded like a weapon. Mother's right. Image matters in the professional world. Maybe if you dress like you had a real job, people would take your little art projects more seriously. Jennifer, my younger sister, giggled into her wine glass. Her marketing position at a local firm barely covered her expenses, but she carried herself like a Fortune 500 executive. Remember when Vivian thought she could make it as a serious designer? How quaint that seems now. I sat quietly cutting my chicken parmesan into precise squares, the same way I'd learned to compartmentalize their words over the years. What they didn't know was that my little art projects had generated more income last month than Marcus made in 3. My freelance graphic design business had been thriving for 2 years, but I'd learned early that sharing good news only invited more creative ways for them to diminish it. "The waiter mentioned you were paying tonight," Harold said, swirling his wine with the confidence of a man who'd never worried about the check. "At least your hobby provides some practical benefits." The irony burned in my chest. This wasn't the first dinner I'd paid for, not by a long shot. Over the past 3 years, I'd quietly become the family's financial backbone, though none of them would ever acknowledge it. They came to me separately, each with their urgent needs and promises to pay me back. Marcus had needed help with his bar exam fees 2 years ago. "Just $5,000 to get me started," he'd said. "I'll triple it back to you once I'm established." That $5,000 had become 15, then 25. Then a steady stream of temporary assistance for his struggling practice. Jennifer's car had been repossessed 18 months ago, and I'd co-signed for her new loan. Then came her security deposits, her credit card payments, her medical bills. Each time she swore it was the last time she'd need help. My parents' requests were more subtle but no less frequent. Emergency, repairs on their house, unexpected medical expenses, temporary help with the store's overhead. They approached these conversations like delicate negotiations, never quite admitting they needed my money, but making it clear that family loyalty demanded my assistance. The restaurant hummed with conversation around us, other families enjoying their meals, without the undercurrent of resentment that seasoned every dish at our table. I watched a couple at the next table laugh together, their faces bright with genuine affection, and wondered what it felt like to have family dinner without keeping mental tallies of insults and financial obligations. "Your apartment situation is still temporary, I hope." Patricia continued, her fork poised over her salad like a conductor's baton. "Surely you're not planning to stay in that neighborhood permanently. The crime rate alone should motivate you to find something more appropriate." The neighborhood she dismissed so casually was actually quite nice, and my apartment was spacious and well-maintained. But admitting I was comfortable would rob her of ammunition for her favorite hobby of redesigning my life according to her specifications. Marcus leaned back in his chair, projecting the casual confidence of someone whose bills were mysteriously always covered. Real estate is all about location. Location, location. You can't build wealth living like a college student forever. His words stung because building wealth was exactly what I was doing, just not in ways they'd ever recognize. While they focused on appearances and status symbols, I was quietly accumulating assets and building a business that could support me for decades. Speaking of real estate, Jennifer chimed in. I've been looking at condos downtown. The market is perfect for someone ready to make a serious investment. I almost choked on my wine. Jennifer's idea of a serious investment was usually a new handbag that cost more than most people's rent. The thought of her navigating a real estate purchase without bankrupting herself was genuinely terrifying. Harold cleared his throat, the signal that he was about to deliver one of his pronouncements about life and success. The difference between winners and losers in this world comes down to taking risks. Your mother and I built our business from nothing, just like Marcus is building his practice and Jennifer is climbing the corporate ladder. Success requires courage. The antique store he mentioned so proudly hadn't shown a profit in over a year. I knew this because I'd been quietly covering their business loan payments since last spring. But Harold spoke about it like a thriving empire, his chest puffed with pride over an enterprise that existed mainly in his imagination. Courage and vision, Patricia added, nodding approvingly. Some people are born with those qualities and others simply aren't. It's not anyone's fault, really. We can't all be leaders. Their words washed over me like cold rain, each comment designed to reinforce the family mythology that cast me as the disappointing underachiever, while they played the roles of successful achievers, graciously tolerating my presence. The performance was so practiced, so seamlessly coordinated, that I almost admired its artistry. What made it truly remarkable was how completely they'd convinced themselves of its truth. In their version of reality, they were self-made successes who occasionally helped their struggling sister out of the goodness of their hearts. The fact that money flowed in exactly the opposite direction had been carefully edited out of their narrative. As I reached for my purse to signal the waiter, my father's phone buzzed against the table. He'd placed it face down next to his wine glass, but the vibration was strong enough to flip it over. The screen lit up with a text message preview, and I caught just enough words to make my blood freeze. Final notice and foreclosure jumped out at me before Harold quickly grabbed the phone and shoved it into his jacket pocket. But it was too late. I'd seen enough to understand that their perfect facade was about to crumble, and somehow I was sure they expected me to catch the pieces. The text message I'd glimpsed haunted me through the rest of the appetizer course, but I said nothing. Instead, I found myself remembering how this entire financial arrangement had started back when I still believed their stories about temporary setbacks and my own inadequacy. It began 3 years ago when Marcus called me in tears. His voice shook as he explained how the bar exam had cost more than expected, how his study materials and prep courses had maxed out his credit cards. "I just need $8,000 to get through the next 2 months," he'd said. "Once I pass the bar and start practicing, I'll pay you back with interest." I'd felt so proud that my successful lawyer brother would turn to me for help. Finally, I had something valuable to offer the family. I transferred the money that same day, telling myself it was an investment in our relationship as much as his future. Jennifer's crisis came 6 months later. Her marketing job was restructuring, which meant temporary pay cuts and uncertain hours. Her car payment was 3 months behind and repossession seemed inevitable. "You're the only one who really understands what it's like to struggle," she'd said, her eyes brimming with tears. "Marcus and the parents, they've always had it easier, but you know what it's like to work for every dollar." The manipulation was so skillful I didn't recognize it at the time. She'd positioned herself as my ally against the family's golden children, making me feel special and trusted. Covering her $6,000 car situation felt like cementing a bond between us. My parents' first request came disguised as a business opportunity. Harold approached me with charts and projections explaining how the antique store was on the verge of a major breakthrough. "We just need $15,000 to secure inventory for the estate sale season," he'd said. "You'd be a silent partner naturally. The returns could set you up for life." Patricia had nodded enthusiastically, her hands gesturing toward imaginary piles of wealth. "This is how real money gets made, sweetheart. Not through those little computer projects, but through substantial investments in proven businesses." I'd written the check believing I was finally earning their respect, finally proving I could think beyond my hobby and participate in serious financial decisions. The promised returns never materialized, but the requests for additional capital certainly did. What followed was a masterclass in financial manipulation. Each family member developed their own approach, their own timing, their own emotional leverage. Marcus would call late at night, his voice heavy with stress about court costs and office expenses. Jennifer would invite me to lunch, then break down crying about medical bills or apartment deposits. My parents would schedule formal meetings presenting their requests like business proposals that only a foolish person would decline. The amounts escalated gradually. A few hundred became a few thousand became monthly payments. Monthly payments became standing obligations that nobody ever explicitly acknowledged, but everyone assumed would continue. I started keeping spreadsheets telling myself it was just temporary record keeping until everyone got back on their feet. The numbers grew until they made me dizzy. 40,000, 60,000, 80,000. Each entry represented not just money, but the faith I'd had in their promises, in their love, in their eventual gratitude. The cruelest part was how they managed to make me feel guilty about my success while simultaneously depending on it. When my design business landed a major contract, Marcus would make jokes about computer people making easy money. When I bought new equipment for my home office, Jennifer would sigh about how some people fell into good fortune while others had to work for everything. They needed my money, but resented my ability to earn it. They depended on my generosity while treating me like their charity case. The cognitive dissonance was so severe that I began to doubt my own perceptions, wondering if maybe they were right about my accomplishments being somehow less real or meaningful than theirs. Tonight's dinner conversation was following the usual script. Patricia was detailing the improvements she planned for the house improvements that I now realized would be funded entirely by my contributions. "The kitchen really needs updating," she mused, as if the renovation budget was simply going to appear through wishful thinking. "Granite countertops would increase the property value substantially." Harold nodded sagely. Investment in real estate is always wise. Unlike some ventures that depend on technology trends and consumer whims. The dig at my business was subtle, but unmistakable. In their minds, my work existed in some ethereal realm where money materialized without real effort, unlike their solid, tangible pursuits that somehow never generated actual profits. Marcus was describing his plans to expand his law practice, his voice full of confidence about markets and opportunities that would surely pan out this time. "I've been researching commercial real estate. The right office space could triple my client base within 6 months." Jennifer listened raptly as if his track record suggested any reason for optimism. "Location is everything in professional services," she agreed. "Image drives results." I found myself calculating how much their dreams would cost me. The kitchen renovation, $20,000. Marcus's new office, $30,000 minimum. Jennifer's inevitable requests for help with her condo fantasy. Who knew the mental arithmetic made me feel sick? But the text message about foreclosure suggested their financial situation was far worse than I'd imagined. If they were losing the house, it meant months of missed mortgage payments, maybe years of mounting debt. It meant the money I'd been sending hadn't been covering emergencies or investments, but basic survival expenses they were too proud to acknowledge. As our entrees arrived, the waiter paused beside Harold's chair. "I'm sorry, sir, but your card was declined. Do you have another form of payment?" The color drained from my father's face. Patricia's fork clattered onto her plate. Marcus and Jennifer looked confused, as if they'd never considered the possibility that their parents might not be able to afford dinner at the restaurant they'd chosen. Harold fumbled through his wallet, his hands shaking slightly as he produced another credit card. "Try this one." Sometimes the magnetic strips get damaged. But I could see the truth in his eyes, the panic of a man whose carefully constructed facade was crumbling in real time. This wasn't about damaged magnetic strips. This was about maxed-out credit lines and bank accounts that had been empty for longer than any of us realized. The waiter returned 2 minutes later with the same apologetic expression. "I'm sorry, sir. This one was also declined." The silence that followed felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that one more step would send everyone tumbling into an abyss of truth they'd spent years avoiding. My family's faces reflected various stages of shock and embarrassment, but underneath it all, I could see the expectation forming in their eyes. They were looking at me. Without a word, I reached into my purse and handed the waiter my credit card. The relief that flooded my parents' faces was almost grotesque in its intensity, as if my intervention was not just expected, but somehow their rightful due. "Thank you, sweetheart," Patricia murmured, though her voice carried more annoyance than gratitude. "These credit card companies are so unreliable these days. All those security measures cause more problems than they solve." Harold nodded vigorously, already rebuilding his narrative. "Exactly right. Probably some computer glitch in their system. These technology issues happen to everyone." But their explanations couldn't disguise what had just occurred. My father, the successful antique dealer who lectured me about business acumen and financial courage, couldn't afford to pay for the dinner he'd invited me to attend. The man who spoke so confidently about investments and market opportunities had just been publicly humiliated by his own poverty. I should have felt sympathetic. I should have graciously changed the subject and allowed them to preserve their dignity. Instead, I felt something darker, stirring in my chest, a mixture of anger and clarity that I'd been suppressing for years. "So," I said, my voice carefully casual, "how exactly are things going with the antique business these days?" Harold's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Quite well, actually. The market for quality pieces has never been stronger." "Really? Because that text message about foreclosure suggested something different." The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Patricia's eyes widened. Marcus looked confused. Jennifer glanced between our parents as if trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "I don't know what you think you saw," Harold said, his voice taking on the stern tone he'd used when I was a child caught in some minor transgression. "But I'd appreciate you not making assumptions about matters you don't understand. I understand that the mortgage company doesn't send final foreclosure notices to people who are current on their payments," I replied. "I also understand that credit cards don't get declined because of magnetic strip problems when the account has available credit." Patricia attempted a laugh that sounded more like a cough. "Vivian, dear, you're being dramatic. These little misunderstandings happen all the time in business. Everything is perfectly fine." "Is it? Because I'm starting to wonder how fine things really are for any of you." I turned to Marcus, who was shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "How's the law practice going?" "Really going, not the version you tell at family dinners." "It's competitive," he said carefully. "Building a client base takes time." "How much time? Because you've been building for over 2 years now and you're still asking me for money every month." His face flushed red. "Those aren't requests for money. Those are temporary business loans that I fully intend to repay." Give me a date. Give me a timeline for when I can expect to see any of the $37,000 I've loaned you." Jennifer gasped. $37,000, Marcus, you never told us it was that much." "It's not that simple," Marcus protested. "Legal expenses are complicated. Court costs, office rent, professional development. These are investments in future earnings." "What future earnings?" I asked. "How many clients do you actually have? How much revenue did your practice generate last month?" The questions hit him like physical blows. His confident facade cracked, revealing the desperation underneath. "These things take time to develop. Rome wasn't built in a day." Rome also wasn't built with other people's money while the builders pretended to be successful architects. I turned to Jennifer next. "What about you? How's that marketing position treating you?" "Fine," she said quickly, but her voice was too high, too defensive. Fine enough to afford the condo you were talking about, fine enough to stop borrowing money for car payments and medical bills and security deposits. I don't borrow, she protested. You help me out sometimes because you're my sister. I've helped you out to the tune of $22,000 over the past 18 months. That's not sisterly assistance. That's financial dependency. The numbers landed like grenades at our elegant table. Patricia looked genuinely shocked, as if she'd had no idea her children were bleeding me dry. Harold's expression was harder to read, but there was something calculating in his eyes that made me deeply uncomfortable. These are private family matters, he said firmly. This is neither the time nor the place for this discussion. When is the right time? I asked, because it seems like the only time we ever talk about money is when one of you needs mine. We never discuss your business's failing or your inability to pay your bills, or the fact that I've been supporting this entire family for 3 years while you all treat me like the unsuccessful one. That's not fair, Patricia said, her voice trembling with what I initially mistook for hurt feelings. We've never treated you badly. You've spent this entire dinner criticizing my appearance, my career, my living situation, and my life choices. You've done that while sitting in a restaurant that I'm paying for after your credit cards were declined, while planning home improvements that I'll be funding. We didn't ask you to pay for anything, Harold said, but his protest sounded weak, even to his own ears. You didn't have to ask. You've trained me so well to anticipate your needs that I automatically reach for my wallet whenever you're in trouble. And then you have the audacity to criticize the career that makes it possible for me to bail you out every single month. The conversation was spiraling beyond anything I'd intended when I handed over my credit card, but I couldn't seem to stop. Years of suppressed resentment were pouring out, and the relief was as intoxicating as it was terrifying. Marcus made one last attempt to regain control of the narrative. Look, we're all family here. Sometimes family members help each other out. That's what family means. Help each other out, I repeated. When was the last time any of you helped me with anything? When was the last time you asked how I was doing? Really doing, not just setting up your next request for money. The silence that greeted my question was answer enough. They couldn't remember because it had never happened. Our relationships had become so transactional that they'd forgotten how to interact with me without an agenda. Furthermore, I continued, my voice gaining strength. When was the last time any of you acknowledged my success instead of dismissing it? When was the last time you showed interest in my work or pride in my accomplishments? Your accomplishments? Patricia's mask finally slipped completely. Sweetheart, you make little pictures on a computer. That's not exactly changing the world. The dismissive tone in her voice, the casual cruelty of reducing my life's work to little pictures, finally broke something inside me that had been bending for years. In that moment, I realized that no amount of money I could give them would ever earn their respect, because respecting me would require them to acknowledge their own failures. My phone buzzed with a notification, and I glanced at the screen automatically. The message was from Tech Corp Industries, the startup I'd been courting for months. My heart stopped as I read the first line. Congratulations. We're pleased to offer you the $60,000 contract for our complete branding package. $60,000 in one contract. More money than Marcus claimed his law practice would make in its first year of operation. More than Jennifer's annual salary. More than my parents' antique store had grossed in the past 2 years combined. As my family sat across from me, faces flushed with embarrassment and anger at having their financial failures exposed, my phone was delivering news that would triple my income for the year. The irony was so perfect, it felt like the universe was playing an elaborate joke. You know what? I said, standing up from the table. I just realized something important. They looked up at me expectantly, probably hoping I was about to apologize for my outburst and restore the comfortable dynamic where I funded their delusions while accepting their condescension. Instead, I picked up my purse and looked each of them in the eye. How does it feel knowing this useless one won't be paying your bills anymore? The words came out clearly, each syllable deliberate and final. The effect was immediate and devastating. Harold's wine glass actually trembled in his grip. Patricia's mouth fell open in a perfect circle of shock. Marcus looked like he'd been slapped, and Jennifer's face went completely white. Furthermore, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word, let me tell you exactly what your useless daughter has been financing while you've been treating her like a charity case. I opened my phone and pulled up my banking app, the one that tracked every transfer I'd made to my family members over the past 3 years. The numbers were devastating in their precision. Marcus, your struggling law practice has cost me $37,215. Not loans, gifts. Because you've never paid back a single penny, and we both know you never will. Marcus tried to interrupt, but I held up my hand. Jennifer, your temporary financial difficulties have cost me $22,863. Car payments, medical bills, rent deposits, credit card payments, and God knows what else. All while you've been planning to buy a condo and criticizing my lifestyle choices. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears, but I was beyond caring about her emotional manipulation. Mom and Dad, your thriving antique business and all those wise investments you keep lecturing me about, I've contributed $41,412 to keep your doors open and your mortgage current. Obviously, that wasn't enough since you're apparently facing foreclosure anyway. The total hung in the air between us like a physical presence. $101,490, more than most people's annual salaries, more than many people's houses were worth, gone with nothing to show for it except the privilege of being criticized by the people who'd spent it. That's over $100,000 in 3 years, I said. Money I earned with my little computer pictures while building a business that just landed a $60,000 contract this evening. I held up my phone, showing them the email notification. That's right. While you were calling me useless, I was closing a deal that will pay me more in 6 months than any of you have made in the past year. Patricia found her voice first. Vivian, you're being cruel. We're family. Family helps each other. Help goes both ways, Mother. When was the last time any of you helped me with anything? When was the last time you offered to contribute to my life instead of just taking from it? Harold stood up, his face red with indignation. How dare you speak to your mother that way? We raised you, we supported you, we gave you everything. You gave me criticism and condescension while I gave you my bank account. That's not family, that's exploitation. Other diners were beginning to stare, but I was beyond caring about public embarrassment. My family had been humiliating me privately for years, so a little public truth-telling seemed like fair compensation. The bank is foreclosing on your house, I continued. Your credit cards are maxed out. Your businesses are failing. Your financial lives are complete disasters. And instead of acknowledging reality and asking for genuine help, you invited me to dinner so you could insult me while I picked up the check. We didn't know you'd seen the text message, Patricia said weakly. That's the point. You've been lying to me for years about your situations while treating me like the family failure. You've been taking my money while making me feel ashamed of how I earn it. Marcus finally spoke up. Look, maybe we haven't been as appreciative as we should have been, but cutting us off completely is extreme. We can work something out. Work something out. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Like what? Another payment plan you'll ignore. Another temporary loan that becomes permanent. Another business opportunity that's guaranteed to fail. You're being unreasonable, Jennifer said through her tears. We never asked you to keep track of every dollar. I kept track because I'm not stupid, despite what you all apparently think. I'm a businesswoman who's been funding a family of people who don't even respect what I do for a living. Harold's voice took on the threatening tone he'd used when I was a teenager breaking curfew. If you walk away from this family, you'll regret it. Blood is thicker than water, Vivian. You can't just abandon your obligations. My obligations. The word hit me like a physical blow. What exactly do I owe you? More money, more tolerance for your insults, more pretending that your failures are temporary setbacks, while my success is just luck. We're your family. Patricia pleaded. "This is what families do." "No," I said firmly. "This is what dysfunctional families do. Healthy families celebrate each other's successes. They support each other emotionally, not just financially. They treat each other with basic respect." I threw my purse over my shoulder and took one last look at their faces. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a mixture of anger and panic as they realized I was serious. "I'm done," I said simply. "Done with the loans that aren't loans. Done with the temporary help that's permanent. Done with being treated like a failure by people who failed at everything they've ever attempted." "You can't just leave," Marcus said desperately. "We're in the middle of dinner." "You're in the middle of dinner that I paid for at a restaurant you couldn't afford while planning expenses you can't cover. Figure it out yourselves." I turned and walked toward the exit, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Behind me, I could hear Patricia calling my name, her voice high and strained. Harold was saying something about family loyalty and moral obligations. Jennifer was crying audibly. But I kept walking each step, carrying me further away from the financial and emotional quicksand that had been pulling me down for years. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like I could breathe. I had almost reached the restaurant's front door when I heard footsteps running behind me. Marcus caught up just as I reached my car in the parking lot, his face flushed and his breathing heavy. "Vivian, wait," he gasped. "Please, I need to talk to you." "We just talked," I said, fumbling with my keys. I thought I was pretty clear. "You don't understand," he said, grabbing my arm. "This isn't just about family dinners and hurt feelings. I'm in serious trouble." Something in his voice made me pause. The desperation was different now, deeper and more frightening than his usual financial anxiety. "What kind of trouble?" He looked around the parking lot nervously, as if checking for surveillance. "The kind where people get hurt if they don't pay their debts on time." My blood went cold. "Marcus, what did you do?" "I borrowed money from the wrong people," he whispered. "People who don't accept payment plans or excuses. People who expect $15,000 by tomorrow morning or else." The parking lot suddenly felt very dark and very dangerous. Everything I'd thought I understood about my family's financial situation had just shifted into territory that was far more serious than maxed out credit cards and foreclosure notices. "How much do you owe them?" I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. $15,000 by tomorrow, but that's just this payment. The total is closer to 40. $40,000 to dangerous people. My brother, the lawyer, who was supposed to be smarter than all of us, had gotten himself trapped in a situation that could destroy his life and possibly mine. Why, I asked, why would you borrow money from loan sharks? His face crumpled with shame. Because the banks wouldn't loan me any more money. Because my practice was failing and I needed cash to keep the doors open. Because I thought I could win it back. Win it back, Marcus, are you gambling? The silence that followed was answer enough. My successful lawyer brother, the golden child who'd always been held up as an example of achievement and responsibility, was a gambling addict who'd borrowed money from criminals to fund his addiction. Everything suddenly made sense. The constant requests for money, the vague explanations about legal expenses and business costs, the panic in his voice whenever I asked for specific details about his practice. He'd been lying about everything, not just to me, but probably to himself. "How long?" I asked. 2 years, he admitted. Maybe 3. It started small, just poker games with other lawyers. But then I found online sites and the amounts got bigger, and I started losing more than I could afford. "So you borrowed money from criminals to chase your losses." I thought I could turn it around. I had a system, a strategy. I was so close to breaking even. "You're never close to breaking even in gambling, Marcus. That's how they keep you hooked." "I know that now," he said miserably. "But it's too late. They want their money tomorrow, and if I don't have it, they're going to hurt me. Maybe worse." As if summoned by his words, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the parking lot and parked directly under one of the overhead lights. The engine continued running, but nobody got out. Marcus saw the vehicle and went completely white. Oh God, they followed me. They said they would, but I didn't think. Who's in that car? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew. The people I owe money to. They've been watching me for weeks, making sure I don't skip town or do anything stupid. The SUV's passenger door opened and a man in an expensive suit climbed out. He was tall and well-built, with the kind of casual confidence that suggested violence was always an option, but rarely necessary. He looked directly at us and smiled, but there was nothing friendly about the expression. Two more men emerged from the vehicle, both dressed similarly and carrying themselves with the same predatory grace. They began walking toward us with the measured pace of people who knew their targets couldn't run. "Vivian," Marcus whispered urgently. "I need that 15,000. Tonight. If you don't help me, I don't know what they'll do." I stood frozen in the parking lot watching three dangerous-looking men approach, while my gambling-addicted brother begged me for money I'd just sworn never to give him again. The evening had gone from family drama to genuine peril in the space of a single conversation. Everything I'd said inside the restaurant about being done with their problems suddenly felt naive and premature. This wasn't about hurt feelings or financial responsibility anymore. This was about my brother's safety and possibly my own. The men were getting closer, and I had about 30 seconds to decide whether to break my promise to myself or let Marcus face the consequences of his choices alone. The lead man reached us first, his smile never wavering despite the obvious threat in his posture. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with perfectly styled hair and shoes that probably cost more than most people's rent. His companions flanked him on either side, creating a semicircle that blocked our path to my car. "Marcus," the man said, his voice surprisingly warm and friendly. "Right on time. I was beginning to think you might try to avoid our little appointment." "Tommy, I told you I'd have the money tomorrow," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "I just need a few more hours." "Tomorrow was yesterday's promise," Tommy replied, still smiling. "Today's promise was tonight. We're very punctual people, Marcus. We appreciate punctuality in others." I found myself studying Tommy's face, looking for signs of the violence Marcus had implied. Instead, I saw a businessman conducting a routine transaction, which somehow made him even more frightening than if he'd been obviously threatening. "This is my sister," Marcus said quickly. "Vivian, this is Tommy. He's been helping me with some temporary cash flow issues." Tommy's attention shifted to me, and I felt like a specimen being examined under a microscope. "Ah, the famous sister. Marcus has told us so much about you. Successful business owner, very generous with family members. It's nice to finally meet you in person." The fact that they'd been discussing me made my skin crawl. How long had Marcus been using my name and reputation to secure his gambling loans? How much did these people know about my finances and business? "I'm not involved in Marcus's business arrangements," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course not," Tommy agreed. "But family is family, isn't it? When someone's in trouble, relatives naturally want to help out." One of his companions, a stockier man with a scar running along his jaw, leaned closer to Marcus. "Your credit's been extended as far as it's going to go," he said quietly. "Time to settle accounts." Marcus looked like he was going to be sick. "I understand the situation. I just need until tomorrow to liquidate some assets." "What assets?" the scarred man asked. "Your law office with the overdue rent, your car that's about to be repossessed, your parents' house that's in foreclosure." The casual mention of my family's financial details was chilling. These people had done their homework, probably better homework than I'd done myself. They knew exactly how desperate and vulnerable my entire family had become. Tommy pulled out his phone and checked the time. "It's currently 8:47. You have until midnight to produce $15,000. That gives you a little over 3 hours to be creative." "And if he can't?" I asked, immediately regretting the question. Tommy's smile widened, showing perfect teeth. "Marcus understands the terms of our agreement. Failure to meet obligations results in additional fees and accelerated payment schedules, plus interest, of course." The euphemisms were almost worse than direct threats. These men had turned violence into a business model complete with professional terminology and customer service smiles. "How much additional interest?" Marcus asked weakly. "Double the principal payable within 24 hours, so $30,000 instead of 15 due by tomorrow night." "That's impossible," Marcus protested. "I don't have access to that kind of money." "Then you should probably focus on tonight's payment," Tommy suggested reasonably. "Solve today's problem before worrying about tomorrow's complications." He gestured toward me with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Perhaps your sister would like to contribute to keeping you healthy and productive. Family investments often have the best returns." The implication was clear. Pay now or pay much more later, assuming Marcus survived to make future payments. The business model was brutally efficient in its simplicity. "I need to think about this," I said. "Naturally," Tommy replied, "but don't think too long. Time is money and money is time. When you run out of one, you tend to run out of the other." He handed me a business card that looked like it belonged to a legitimate financial services company. "My direct number is on the back. Marcus has it memorized, but redundancy is always wise in important communications." The scarred man moved closer to Marcus, his voice dropping to a whisper that I could barely hear. "We know where your office is. We know where your parents live. We know where your sister works and where she lives. Running isn't really an option anymore." The casual mention of my address sent ice through my veins. I'd been pulled into this situation without my consent, and now I was apparently part of their insurance policy against Marcus defaulting on his debts. "This is a family matter," I said, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "It doesn't need to involve threats against innocent people." Tommy laughed a sound that was genuinely amused rather than menacing. "Miss Vivian, there are no innocent people in debt collection. There are borrowers, there are guarantors, and there are people who choose to get involved. The moment you appeared in this parking lot, you moved from the third category to the second." "I never guaranteed anything," I protested. "You're here," the scarred man pointed out. "That's a form of guarantee all by itself." Marcus grabbed my arm, his grip desperate and painful. "Vivian, please. I know what I said inside the restaurant, but this is different. These people don't care about family drama or hurt feelings. They care about money, and they get it one way or another." I looked at my brother's terrified face and realized that everything I'd said about cutting him off financially had become completely irrelevant. This wasn't about enabling his poor choices anymore. This was about preventing genuine harm to him and potentially to me. "How did it get this bad?" I asked. "How do you go from poker games with lawyers to owing money to people like this?" "It happens gradually," Tommy said helpfully, as if we were discussing a medical condition. "Small bets become large bets. Legal gambling becomes less legal alternatives. Personal loans become business arrangements. It's a very natural progression for people with addictive personalities." The clinical way he described my brother's destruction was almost worse than overt cruelty. He talked about ruining lives like he was explaining quarterly earnings to shareholders. Marcus's phone buzzed and he checked the message with shaking hands. His face went even whiter as he read. "They know about Jennifer," he whispered. "What about Jennifer?" I asked. Tommy checked his own phone and nodded approvingly. "Efficient staff work. Your sister Jennifer left the restaurant about 10 minutes ago. She's currently at her apartment, probably wondering why her brother is taking so long to come home from dinner." The implication was crystal clear. They had people watching all of us now, not just Marcus. My sister, who had nothing to do with any of this beyond being related to a gambling addict, was now part of their leverage system. "She doesn't know anything about this," I said. "She knows she has a brother who owes money and a sister who earns money," the scarred man replied. "That's sufficient knowledge for our purposes." My phone rang and I saw Jennifer's name on the caller ID. With growing dread, I answered the call. "Vivian." Jennifer's voice was high and panicked. "There are men outside my apartment building. They're not doing anything threatening, but they're obviously watching the entrance. I'm scared." Tommy nodded approvingly. "Good situational awareness. That's a useful survival skill. Tell her you're handling the situation, the scarred man suggested. Tell her to stay inside and wait for your call. I wanted to hang up and call the police, but the rational part of my brain understood that involving law enforcement would probably make things worse for everyone. These people had turned intimidation into an art form, staying just on the right side of actionable threats while making their intentions perfectly clear. "Jennifer, I need you to stay inside for a while," I said. "Marcus got himself into some trouble, and I'm working on fixing it." "What kind of trouble should I call the police?" Tommy shook his head firmly, his smile never wavering. "No police," I said. "Just stay put. I'll call you back in a few hours." I hung up feeling like I'd just signed both our death warrants. "Excellent decision-making," Tommy said approvingly. "Police involvement tends to complicate these situations unnecessarily. We prefer to handle things privately between friends." "We're not friends," I said. "Not yet," he agreed, "but money has a way of building relationships. Pay tonight's obligation, and we can start building trust for future interactions." The casual assumption that there would be future interactions made me realize that paying Marcus's debt tonight wouldn't end this nightmare. It would just buy us time to dig the hole deeper. "If I pay the $15,000, what guarantee do I have that this ends here?" I asked. Tommy looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Why would it end? Marcus still has outstanding obligations. Tonight's payment is just bringing his account current. How much does he owe in total? Currently about $43,000, including tonight's payment and accumulated interest. But that number changes daily depending on his gambling activity. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear into the asphalt. "I've been trying to win it back," he said miserably. "I thought if I could hit one big score, I could pay everyone off and start fresh." "Addicts always think that," the scarred man observed. "It's part of the psychology. The addiction convinces them that the solution to gambling losses is more gambling." They understood Marcus's psychology better than he understood it himself, which explained how they'd managed to trap him so completely. They were predators who specialized in people exactly like my brother. My phone buzzed with a text message and I glanced at the screen. It was from my bank confirming that my credit line had been increased to accommodate the new TechCorp contract. The irony was crushing. I just landed the biggest deal of my career, and I was about to spend the money on criminals who'd targeted my family. "Time check," Tommy announced. 9:15. You have 2 hours and 45 minutes to make tonight's payment. He gestured toward the restaurant where I could see my parents still sitting at our table, probably wondering what had happened to their children and their ride home. Of course, if you need to liquidate family assets quickly, your parents might have valuable items in their antique store. Sometimes desperate situations call for creative solutions. The suggestion that my parents' business might be robbed to pay Marcus's gambling debts was the final straw. These people weren't just threatening my brother anymore. They were threatening my entire family, including 2 people in their 60s who had no idea their son had put them all in danger. "I'll pay the $15,000, I said quietly, "but I want guarantees about my family's safety." "Payment first," Tommy said pleasantly. "Negotiations second. That's standard business protocol." I looked at Marcus, who was staring at the ground like a man attending his own funeral. Everything I'd said about cutting him off, everything I'd planned about establishing boundaries and protecting my own financial future, had just become meaningless. But as I started to reach for my phone to initiate the bank transfer, a new sound cut through the night air. Sirens growing closer, accompanied by the distinctive rumble of multiple police vehicles approaching at high speed. Tommy's smile disappeared for the first time since he'd approached us. "Now that," he said quietly, "is an unfortunate complication." The sirens grew louder, but instead of patrol cars, 3 black sedans pulled into the parking lot with the efficient precision of a military operation. Men in suits emerged from each vehicle, but their badges and coordinated movements immediately identified them as federal agents rather than local police. Tommy's casual confidence evaporated instantly. He and his companions exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their experience with law enforcement encounters. Without a word, they began backing toward their SUV. "This conversation isn't over," Tommy said to Marcus, his voice losing all pretense of friendliness. "Payment schedules don't change just because the FBI decides to crash your family reunion." The federal agents were approaching from multiple directions, clearly executing a planned operation rather than responding to a random call. Tommy and his men reached their vehicle and drove away without any attempt to confront the agents, suggesting they knew exactly why law enforcement had arrived. A woman in her early 40s approached us, her badge clearly visible against her dark jacket. She had the calm authority of someone accustomed to dealing with dangerous situations and frightened civilians. "Agent Sarah Rodriguez, FBI Financial Crimes Division," she said, showing her credentials. "Are you Vivian Chen?" The use of my full name sent a chill through me. "Yes, but I think there's been some mistake. I'm not involved in any financial crimes." "We're not suggesting you are," Agent Rodriguez replied. "But your name has appeared in connection with an ongoing investigation, and we'd like to ask you some questions." Marcus looked like he was about to collapse. "What kind of investigation?" Agent Rodriguez studied him with the piercing gaze of someone trained to read deception and fear. "Mr. Marcus Chen, you're also someone we'd like to speak with. Both of you, actually." She gestured toward the restaurant where my parents were probably still wondering why their children had disappeared. "Are there other family members we should include in this conversation?" "Our parents are inside," I said carefully, "but they don't know anything about whatever this is about." "That remains to be determined," Agent Rodriguez said. "For now, let's focus on what you two know." She led us to one of the federal vehicles and opened a tablet computer filled with documents and photographs. The first image she showed us was a copy of a loan agreement with my signature at the bottom. "Do you recognize this document?" she asked. I studied the paperwork carefully. It was a promissory note for $25,000 dated 3 months ago with my name and address clearly printed, but I'd never seen it before in my life. "This isn't my signature," I said immediately. "I never signed this document." "Are you certain it's a substantial amount of money to forget borrowing?" "I'm absolutely certain. I've never borrowed money from anyone. I don't even carry credit card balances." Agent Rodriguez showed me another document, then another. Each one bore my forged signature and committed me to increasingly large financial obligations I'd never agreed to. The amounts were staggering, totaling well over $100,000. "Someone has been using your identity to secure loans from various sources," she explained. "In some cases, legitimate financial institutions. In others, less legitimate operations." I looked at Marcus, whose face had gone from white to green. "You didn't just gamble away your own money. You stole my identity to get more." "I was desperate," he whispered. "I thought I could pay it all back before anyone noticed." "You thought you could forge federal loan documents and nobody would notice?" Agent Rodriguez asked incredulously. "They weren't federal loans at first," Marcus protested. "They were private lenders who didn't check documentation very carefully. But then I needed larger amounts, and the private people started requiring more paperwork." Agent Rodriguez pulled up another screen showing a series of financial transactions. "Your sister's name appears on promissory notes totaling $137,000. Most of that money went directly into online gambling accounts registered in your name." The number hit me like a physical blow. $137,000 borrowed against my identity, my credit, my business reputation. Marcus hadn't just been gambling away the money I'd freely given him. He'd been stealing my entire financial future to fund his addiction. "How is this possible?" I asked. "Don't these lenders verify identities?" "They're supposed to," Agent Rodriguez said, "but your brother had access to your personal information, your social security number, copies of your identification documents. Identity theft between family members is surprisingly common because relatives typically have access to the necessary paperwork." I thought back to Christmas dinner at Marcus's apartment when I'd left my purse in his car while we carried in presents. He'd offered to bring it inside later, giving him plenty of time to photograph my driver's license, credit cards, and other identification documents. "The photographs," I said numbly. "You took pictures of my documents when I left my purse in your car." Marcus nodded miserably. "I told myself it was just temporary. I thought I'd win the money back and destroy the pictures before anyone got hurt. Instead, you destroyed your sister's credit and put her at risk for crimes she didn't commit," Agent Rodriguez said sternly. She showed me another document that made my blood freeze. It was a business partnership agreement claiming that Marcus and I were joint owners of a consulting firm specializing in legal and design services. According to the paperwork, I was an equal partner in his failing law practice and therefore equally responsible for its debts and obligations. "This makes you liable for his business loans, his professional malpractice insurance, even his office rent," Agent Rodriguez explained. "From a legal standpoint, you've been his business partner for 8 months. "That's completely fabricated," I protested. "I've never been involved in his law practice." "Tell that to the creditors who think you've been guaranteeing his expenses," she replied. "Your forged signature appears on documents worth over $200,000 when you combine the personal loans with the business obligations. $200,000. My successful graphic design business, my careful financial planning, my entire economic future had been stolen by my own brother to feed his gambling addiction. Even if I could prove the documents were forged, untangling the legal mess would take years and cost a fortune in attorney fees." "There's more," Agent Rodriguez said grimly. She pulled up a series of email exchanges between Marcus and various lenders. "Your brother has been representing you as a silent partner in his gambling activities. Some of these communications suggest you've been providing strategy and capital for his online betting." "That's completely false," I said. "I hate gambling. I've never placed a bet in my life." Unfortunately, the lenders believe otherwise. In fact, some of them think you're the primary decision maker, and your brother is just the front man. The scope of Marcus's betrayal kept expanding beyond anything I could have imagined. Not only had he stolen my identity and forged my signature, but he'd been actively portraying me as his criminal accomplice to justify larger and larger loans. My phone buzzed with a notification and I glanced at the screen automatically. It was my banking app alerting me to suspicious activity on my accounts. With growing horror, I opened the application and saw a series of charges I'd never authorized. "Agent Rodriguez," I said, my voice shaking, "someone is actively using my credit cards right now." She leaned over to look at my phone screen. The charges were substantial and recent, including cash advances, wire transfers, and online payments to gambling websites. "When did this activity start?" she asked. I scrolled through the transaction history, feeling sicker with each entry. 3 hours ago, right around the time we sat down for dinner." Agent Rodriguez and I looked at Marcus simultaneously. His face told us everything we needed to know. "You're still using her identity," Agent Rodriguez said, her voice flat with disgust. "Even after everything you've told us about being desperate and wanting to make things right, you're continuing to steal from your sister." "I had to," Marcus said desperately. "Tommy expects payment tonight. If I don't have the money, he'll hurt all of us." "So you decided to steal more money from the person who's been supporting you for years." "I was going to tell her," he protested weakly. "I was going to explain everything and ask for help." "By showing her a bunch of forged documents that make her criminally liable for your debts?" I asked incredulously. Agent Rodriguez closed her tablet and fixed Marcus with a stare that could have melted steel. "Mr. Chen, you're under arrest for identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. You have the right to remain silent." As she read him his Miranda rights, I found myself staring at my phone screen, watching my bank balance decrease in real time as charges continued to appear. Even now, even while being arrested, the gambling websites continued processing transactions using my stolen financial information. "Can you stop the charges?" I asked Agent Rodriguez. "We'll contact your bank immediately and freeze all accounts associated with the fraudulent activity," she assured me. "But recovering the money that's already been stolen will take time." I calculated quickly in my head. Between the forged loans and the unauthorized charges, Marcus had stolen roughly $250,000 in my name. Even if I could prove my innocence and recover some of the money, my credit would be destroyed for years. The successful business I'd built, the financial independence I'd worked so hard to achieve, the future I'd planned for myself, had all been destroyed by the brother I'd been trying to help. Agent Rodriguez finished arresting Marcus and turned back to me. "There's something else you need to know about this investigation." "What else could there possibly be?" I asked. "The loan shark operation you encountered tonight. We've been investigating them for 6 months. They don't just loan money to desperate gamblers. They're part of a larger criminal network that specializes in identity theft and financial fraud." She pulled out her phone and showed me surveillance photos of Tommy and his associates. "These men work with people like your brother to identify potential victims with good credit and substantial assets. They help forge documents, launder money, and intimidate families into paying debts they never actually owed." The implication hit me like a sledgehammer. Marcus wasn't just a victim of their loan shark operation. He was helping them target other people. "That's what we're trying to determine," Agent Rodriguez said. "But based on the evidence we've collected so far, your brother may have been actively recruiting other victims for this criminal network." I looked at Marcus, who was now sitting in the back of a federal vehicle with his hands cuffed behind his back. The brother I'd been trying to save wasn't just a gambling addict who'd made poor choices. He was a criminal who'd been systematically destroying other people's lives to fund his addiction. And I was just one of his victims. Agent Rodriguez led me to a quieter section of the parking lot where we could speak privately, while her colleagues processed Marcus and secured the crime scene. The federal operation was clearly much larger than a simple identity theft case. "Before we continue," she said, "I need you to understand that you're in potential physical danger. The people who approached you tonight aren't just loan sharks. They're part of an organized criminal enterprise that doesn't distinguish between willing participants and unwilling victims." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. "It means they consider you a debtor now regardless of how the debt was created. From their perspective, money was loaned in your name, and they expect to be repaid by you or your family." She showed me surveillance photos taken from various angles around the restaurant. Tommy and his associates had been watching us for longer than I'd realized, and they weren't alone. At least 6 different vehicles had been positioned around the area, creating a surveillance net that covered all possible escape routes. This level of coordination suggests they were planning something more than just collecting tonight's payment from your brother, Agent Rodriguez explained. They were prepared for a larger operation. "What kind of operation?" "Kidnapping, most likely. If your brother couldn't pay, they were probably planning to take him and use him as leverage against your family. When you showed up and demonstrated access to substantial funds, you became a more valuable target." The casual way she discussed kidnapping made my knees weak. I thought tonight's confrontation was about money and family drama, not organized crime and personal safety. "Are they still watching us?" I asked, glancing around the parking lot nervously. "Our surveillance teams have identified at least 3 vehicles maintaining observation posts around this location. The subjects haven't left the area, which suggests they're waiting to see how this situation develops." Agent Rodriguez pulled up another screen on her tablet showing financial records I didn't recognize. "Your brother's gambling addiction made him an ideal recruitment target for this organization. They specifically look for people with access to family members who have good credit and substantial assets. So they've been planning to target my family for months. Longer than that. We have evidence suggesting they've been investigating your financial situation for over a year. They know about your business, your contracts, your banking relationships, even your real estate holdings." I didn't own any real estate, but apparently the criminals thought I did. "What real estate holdings?" Agent Rodriguez frowned and scrolled through the documents on her tablet. "According to our intelligence, you're listed as the beneficial owner of several properties in different states. Investment properties, generating rental income." "That's impossible. I rent my apartment. I've never owned any property." She showed me deed records and property tax documents bearing my name and signature. Just like the loan agreements, they were obvious forgeries, but they'd been filed with official government agencies and recorded as legitimate transactions. Your brother has been creating an entirely fictional financial profile for you, she explained. On paper, you appear to be a wealthy property investor with multiple income streams and substantial collateral for large loans. The scope of the fraud was staggering. Marcus hadn't just stolen my identity to get money for gambling. He'd constructed an elaborate false persona that made me appear to be worth millions of dollars. Why would he make me look wealthy? Wouldn't that make it harder to get sympathy loans? Because the loans weren't about sympathy. They were about collateral. The lenders believed they could seize your properties if you defaulted on the payments. Agent Rodriguez pulled up mortgage documents showing that someone had taken out second mortgages on properties I'd never owned, using my identity as the borrower. The total amount of these phantom real estate loans exceeded $500,000. When the criminal organization realizes these properties don't exist, she continued, they're going to demand immediate payment of the full loan amounts, and they're not going to accept explanations about identity theft and forged documents. My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but Agent Rodriguez nodded for me to answer it. Hello, Miss Vivian. The voice was Tommy's, though he sounded different now, more businesslike and less friendly. I think we need to have another conversation. I'm talking to the FBI, I said. Whatever you want to discuss should probably go through official channels. Tommy laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. The FBI is investigating financial paperwork. I'm concerned about more immediate issues like the fact that your brother has been representing you as a business partner in some very expensive ventures. I'm not his business partner in anything. According to the documentation we have, you've been guaranteeing his gambling losses for 8 months. You've also been providing investment capital for what he called sure thing opportunities. Agent Rodriguez was listening to the conversation and making notes on her tablet. She held up a written message. Keep him talking. What kind of documentation? I asked. Signed agreements, partnership contracts, financial statements showing your net worth and available collateral. Very impressive portfolio, by the way. Your property investments have been performing quite well. Those documents are forged, I said. I don't own any properties. That's an interesting claim, Tommy replied, because we've done our own research on your holdings. Public records, tax assessments, mortgage information. Everything appears to be legitimate and properly recorded. Agent Rodriguez held up another note. They have copies of the forged documents. Even if the paperwork looks official, I said, I'm telling you those aren't my signatures and those aren't my properties. Miss Vivian, I appreciate your position, but from a business standpoint, signatures and property records are what matter. Intentions and explanations are irrelevant when money is on the table. How much money are we talking about? Currently, including your brother's gambling debts, the real estate loans, and accumulated interest, you're looking at roughly $600,000. $600,000. The number was so large it didn't seem real. I made good money as a freelance designer, but $600,000 might as well have been $6 million. There was no possible way I could pay that amount, even if I sold everything I owned and liquidated my entire business. I don't have that kind of money, I said honestly. But according to your financial statements, your property portfolio alone is worth over $1 million. Liquidating half your assets should be straightforward. Those properties don't exist. The financial statements are fake. My brother forged all those documents. Tommy was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had turned cold. Miss Vivian, if you're suggesting that we've been defrauded, that's a very serious accusation. Organizations like ours don't respond well to being cheated. Agent Rodriguez held up a new note. They think you and Marcus conspired to defraud them. I'm not suggesting anything, I said carefully. I'm telling you that I never signed any loan agreements. I never entered into any business partnerships, and I don't own any properties that could be used as collateral. Then you have a very serious problem, Tommy said, because someone owes us $600,000 plus interest, and we have documentation showing that person is you. The documentation is forged. Prove it. The challenge hung in the air between us. How do you prove a negative? How do you demonstrate that documents filed with government agencies and recorded in official databases are fraudulent? Even if I could eventually clear my name through legal proceedings, that process would take months or years. In the meantime, Tommy continued, we expect payments to continue on schedule. Tonight's $15,000 was just the first installment. We'll expect another payment next week and the week after that until the full amount is settled. I can't pay money I don't owe on debts I didn't create. Miss Vivian let me explain something about our business model. We don't care about the emotional or legal details of how debts are created. We care about collecting money from people who have access to money. According to our research, you have access to substantial funds through your business and your property investments. Agent Rodriguez held up another note, stall for time. What if I could prove the documents are forged? I asked. How long would that take? I don't know, weeks, maybe months. We don't operate on legal timescales, Tommy said. We operate on business timescales. Debts accrue interest daily. Collections activities continue regardless of pending paperwork. What kind of collections activities? The kind that encourage prompt payment, he replied. Your brother is currently in federal custody, which complicates direct collections from him. But he has family members with financial resources and strong motivations to keep him healthy. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. With Marcus in jail, they were shifting their focus to collecting from me and the rest of my family. My parents don't have any money, I said. Their house is in foreclosure and their business is failing. But they have a daughter who just landed a $60,000 contract, Tommy pointed out. Family members often find creative ways to help each other during difficult times. He knew about the TechCorp contract. These people had been monitoring my business activities, my banking relationships, possibly even my email communications. The level of surveillance was far more sophisticated than I'd imagined. I need time to sort this out, I said. Time costs money, Miss Vivian. Every day you delay increases the total amount owed. Interest compounds daily and our collection fees are quite substantial. Agent Rodriguez was writing furiously, apparently coordinating with other team members through text messages. She held up a note. Almost ready. How much time? Tommy asked. A week. A week costs you an additional $50,000 in interest and fees. Are you sure that's economically efficient? $50,000 just for a week's delay. Even if I could prove my innocence, the financial penalties for defending myself would bankrupt me. What are my other options? I asked. Immediate payment of tonight's installment followed by a structured payment plan for the remaining balance. We're reasonable business people, Miss Vivian. We want to find solutions that work for everyone. Agent Rodriguez held up a final note, now. Suddenly, the parking lot filled with the sound of vehicles moving at high speed. Federal agents in tactical gear surrounded the restaurant from multiple directions, their movements coordinated with military precision. Miss Vivian. Tommy's voice had changed again, taking on an edge of concern. It sounds like your evening is about to become more complicated. The FBI is arresting my brother for identity theft, I said. This isn't about me trying to avoid paying debts. This is about criminal fraud. Criminal fraud that resulted in our organization losing substantial amounts of money, Tommy replied. From our perspective, the source of the problem is less important than the solution. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone while federal agents secured the area around us. Agent Rodriguez was coordinating the operation through her radio, calling out position reports and tactical updates. Did they get him? I asked. We got his phone signal, she replied. But these people are professionals. Chances are good that Tommy was using a disposable phone from a remote location. She showed me her tablet screen, which now displayed a map with multiple red dots indicating vehicle positions around the restaurant. However, we did locate their surveillance teams. 6 vehicles, 14 suspects, all now in federal custody. Does that mean it's over? Agent Rodriguez looked at me with an expression that was part sympathy and part professional concern. "Miss Vivian, I'm afraid this is just the beginning. These people don't forget about debts, and they don't accept legal technicalities as payment plans. So what happens now? Now we try to keep you alive long enough to untangle the mess your brother created." Agent Rodriguez led me inside the restaurant where my parents were sitting at our table, looking confused and increasingly worried. Other diners had been quietly evacuated during the federal operation, leaving the dining room eerily empty, except for law enforcement personnel and my family. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk," I said, sliding into my chair across from them. Harold looked at the FBI agents positioned around the restaurant and then at Marcus's empty seat. "Where's your brother? And why are there federal agents here?" Before I could answer, Agent Rodriguez placed her tablet on the table and showed them the same forged loan documents she'd shown me. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen, your son has been using your daughter's identity to commit federal financial crimes. He's currently under arrest." Patricia's face went white. "That's impossible. Marcus is a lawyer. He would never do anything illegal." "Unfortunately, we have substantial evidence suggesting otherwise," Agent Rodriguez replied. She scrolled through dozens of forged documents, each one bearing my signature and committing me to massive financial obligations. "These are loan agreements totaling over $600,000, all signed with your daughter's forged signature," she explained. "The money was used primarily for online gambling, though some of it went to pay legitimate business expenses for your son's law practice." Harold studied the documents with the careful attention he usually reserved for appraising antiques. "The signatures look authentic," he said slowly. "That's because your son had access to legitimate identification documents and could practice copying the signatures," Agent Rodriguez explained. "Identity theft between family members is often very sophisticated because the perpetrator has intimate knowledge of the victim's personal information." I watched my parents' faces as the magnitude of Marcus's betrayal became clear. They looked like people watching their house burn down, helpless and devastated by the scope of the disaster. "How long has this been going on?" Patricia asked. "Based on the earliest documents we've recovered, at least 18 months, Agent Rodriguez said, "possibly longer." She showed them the business partnership agreement that made me legally responsible for Marcus's law practice. "Your daughter has been listed as a business partner and financial guarantor for most of your son's professional obligations." "But Vivian doesn't know anything about legal work," Harold protested. "That's irrelevant from a legal standpoint," Agent Rodriguez replied. "Her forged signature makes her responsible for the debts regardless of her actual involvement or knowledge." Patricia turned to me with an expression of confusion and growing horror. "Does this mean you owe all this money?" "It means the people who loan the money think I owe it," I said. "Proving the documents are forged will take time, and these aren't the kind of creditors who wait for legal proceedings." Agent Rodriguez pulled up another screen showing financial records for my parents' antique store. "There's another complication. Your son listed this business as collateral for several of the larger loans." Harold's face went from pale to green. "He used our store as collateral. How is that possible?" "Forged business partnership documents claiming your daughter is a co-owner of the antique store," Agent Rodriguez explained. "According to the paperwork, she has the legal authority to pledge business assets as loan collateral." The scope of Marcus's document forgery was breathtaking. He hadn't just stolen my identity, he'd created an entirely fictional business empire that included my parents' store properties I'd never owned and financial resources that existed only on paper. "What does this mean for our business?" Patricia asked. "It means the criminal organization that loaned money to your son believes they have legal claim to your inventory and real estate," Agent Rodriguez said bluntly. "They think they can seize your store if the loans aren't repaid." Harold stood up from the table so quickly his chair fell over backward. "They can't take our store. We've owned that business for 30 years. "Unfortunately, they don't care about your legitimate ownership," Agent Rodriguez replied. They have documents suggesting your daughter pledged it as collateral, and they're prepared to collect by any means necessary. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. I showed the screen to Agent Rodriguez, who read it and immediately called for backup. "We're outside your parents' store. Nice inventory. Would be shame if something happened to it before tomorrow's payment deadline." Agent Rodriguez was already coordinating a response through her radio. "All units, we have credible threats against a civilian business. Need immediate protective surveillance at Chen Antiques on 5th Street. She turned back to my parents. "You need to understand that you're in immediate physical danger. These people don't distinguish between family members when collecting debts." "But we don't owe them anything," Patricia protested. "Your son created documents suggesting you do," Agent Rodriguez said. "From their perspective, the entire Chen family is responsible for paying back money that was loaned based on forged collateral agreements." Harold sank back into his chair, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "How much money are we talking about?" $600,000 plus interest and fees that increase daily. The number hit them like a physical blow. Their antique store hadn't generated $600 in profit in the past month, let alone $600,000. "We'll lose everything," Patricia whispered. Agent Rodriguez checked her phone and frowned at whatever message she'd received. "There's been a development. Your son just confessed to additional crimes we weren't previously aware of." "What additional crimes?" I asked. "Document forgery for other families. Your brother wasn't just stealing your identity to get money for gambling. He was running a broader identity theft operation, helping the criminal organization target other victims." She showed us law enforcement booking photos of 3 other people all around Marcus's age, all arrested in the past 6 months for financial crimes. These individuals were also recruited by the same criminal network. They were targeting their own family members and friends for identity theft and financial fraud. "Marcus was part of an organized conspiracy," Harold asked. "More than that. According to his confession, he was actively recruiting new victims. The criminal organization paid him commission for every successful identity theft case he helped develop." The revelation hit me like a sledgehammer. Marcus hadn't just been a victim of his own gambling addiction. He'd been a predator systematically destroying other families to earn money from the criminals who were eventually targeting our own family. "How many people did he target?" I asked. Agent Rodriguez scrolled through a lengthy document on her tablet. "At least 12 families over the past 2 years. Total financial damage exceeds $2 million. $2 million in stolen identities and forged loans, all coordinated by my brother and the criminal network that was now demanding payment from my family." Marcus had been operating as a professional criminal while maintaining the facade of a struggling lawyer. The commission payments explain how he was able to keep gambling even when his legitimate income disappeared. Agent Rodriguez continued. He was earning substantial money by helping destroy other people's financial lives. Patricia was crying now, quiet tears that spoke to a grief deeper than anything I'd seen from her. "Our son is a criminal." "Your son is a criminal who put your entire family at risk," Agent Rodriguez corrected. "The people demanding payment don't care that you were unaware of his activities. They expect compensation for their losses, and they're prepared to collect from anyone with the Chen family name." My phone rang again, and I saw Tommy's number on the caller ID. Agent Rodriguez nodded for me to answer, but this time she activated a recording device. "Hello, Tommy. Miss Vivian, I've just received some disturbing information about your family's business arrangements." "What kind of information?" "It seems your brother has been less than completely honest about his activities and his relationship with our organization." Agent Rodriguez held up a note. "He knows about the confession." "What did he tell you?" I asked. "Enough to suggest that your family's financial obligations are significantly larger than we initially discussed." "How much larger?" "Your brother's commission activities with our organization total approximately $100,000 in unpaid fees. Combined with the existing loan obligations, your family now owes roughly $700,000. $700,000. The number was so astronomical it felt like play money from a board game. Tommy, there's no way my family can pay that much money. Even if we liquidated everything we own, we couldn't come close to that amount. Miss Vivian, that's a disappointing attitude. Resourceful people find creative solutions to financial challenges. What kind of creative solutions? Your design business generates substantial income. Your parents have valuable inventory in their antique store. Your family owns real estate and other assets that could be converted to cash. The real estate documents are forged, I reminded him. Perhaps, but the antique store is quite real, and our research suggests it contains inventory worth substantially more than your parents probably realize. Agent Rodriguez's expression darkened. She held up a note. They've been inside the store. What do you mean by research? I asked. Professional appraisal of the merchandise. Some of those pieces are worth considerably more than the prices your parents are asking. You broke into our store. We conducted a preliminary assessment of available collateral, Tommy corrected. Standard business practice when substantial sums are involved. Agent Rodriguez was typing frantically on her tablet, apparently coordinating with the team she'd sent to watch my parents' store. The appraisal identified several items that could be converted to cash immediately, Tommy continued. A few key pieces could cover tonight's payment, with the remainder sold over time to address the larger debt. You want us to sell my parents' inventory to pay my brother's gambling debts? I want you to honor the financial obligations created in your name, using whatever resources are available to your family. And if we refuse, Miss Vivian, refusing isn't really an option at this point. Your brother's cooperation with law enforcement has created additional complications for our organization. Those complications need to be addressed through increased collections activities. Agent Rodriguez held up a note. Keep him talking. We're tracing the call. What kind of increased collections activities? I asked. The kind that demonstrate to other clients that defaulting on obligations has consequences, Tommy replied. Your family's situation has become a teaching opportunity for our other customers. The casual way he discussed using my family as an example to intimidate other victims made my blood freeze. We weren't just people who owed money anymore. We were going to be used to send a message to other families trapped in similar situations. How much time do we have? I asked. 24 hours to produce the first installment, 72 hours to present a comprehensive payment plan for the remaining balance. And if we can't, then your family becomes a case study in the consequences of defaulting on legitimate business obligations. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone while Agent Rodriguez continued coordinating law enforcement responses through her radio. Did you get the trace? I asked. Partial location data, but these people use sophisticated communication security, she replied. However, we did get something more valuable. What? Agent Rodriguez showed me a new screen on her tablet displaying surveillance footage from multiple locations. While Tommy was talking to you, his people were moving into position around your parents' store, your apartment building, and your office complex. Moving into position for what? To demonstrate that they can reach you anywhere, anytime, regardless of law enforcement protection. She zoomed in on one of the surveillance images showing Tommy himself standing in front of my apartment building, looking directly at the security camera with that same predatory smile. Miss Vivian, Agent Rodriguez said quietly, I think it's time we discussed witness protection. Agent Rodriguez's mention of witness protection sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the restaurant's air conditioning. The idea that my life had become dangerous enough to require federal protection felt surreal, like something that happened to other people in movies. Is witness protection really necessary? I asked. Can't you just arrest them? We're working on that, she replied. But this criminal organization is significantly larger and more sophisticated than a typical loan shark operation. They have legitimate business fronts, political connections, and enough resources to operate across multiple states. She opened a new section of her tablet showing organizational charts that looked like something from a corporate boardroom. Names, photos, and connection lines mapped out a criminal enterprise that employed dozens of people and generated millions of dollars annually. "The people who approached you tonight are mid-level operatives," Agent Rodriguez explained. "The actual leadership operates from legitimate businesses and rarely has direct contact with victims or street-level collections. So, arresting Tommy and his team won't end this. It might temporarily disrupt their local operations, but the larger organization would simply send different people to continue collections. Your family's debt would be transferred to another team, possibly one with less restraint about using violence." Harold had been listening to our conversation with growing alarm. "Agent Rodriguez, are you saying that federal law enforcement can't protect us from these criminals?" "I'm saying that protection requires your family's complete cooperation with our investigation, and even then, there are no guarantees. These people have resources and motivation to pursue collections for years if necessary." She showed us surveillance photos of other families who had been targeted by the same criminal network. The images were disturbing, showing damaged property, intimidated victims, and in some cases, people who appeared to have been physically assaulted. "This organization doesn't forget debts, and they don't accept partial payments as final settlements," Agent Rodriguez continued. "Once you're in their system, you're expected to pay in full plus interest plus fees plus penalties for any delays or complications." Patricia was staring at the surveillance photos with obvious terror. "What happened to these other families?" "Different outcomes," Agent Rodriguez said grimly. "Some managed to pay the full amounts and were released from their obligations. Others had their homes vandalized, their businesses destroyed, their family members threatened or attacked. And the ones who cooperated with law enforcement, mixed results. A few families entered witness protection and successfully relocated to other states. Others tried to fight the charges publicly and faced escalating retaliation until they either paid or disappeared." The casual mention of people disappearing made my hands shake. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about survival. "What kind of cooperation would you need from us?" I asked. Agent Rodriguez pulled out a formal document and placed it on the table. "Complete financial disclosure, including access to all bank accounts, business records, and asset documentation. Testimony before a federal grand jury about your brother's activities and the criminal organization's operations, participation in recorded phone calls, and possibly in-person meetings with the suspects." "Recorded meetings, you mean wearing a wire?" "Among other surveillance techniques. We need evidence of the organization's operations that will stand up in federal court. Your family's case could be the key to dismantling their entire network." Harold leaned back in his chair, looking overwhelmed by the scope of what was being asked. "And if we refuse to cooperate, then you're on your own against people who have demonstrated they're willing to use violence to collect money," Agent Rodriguez said bluntly. "Federal law enforcement can't provide protection to people who won't help us build cases against criminals. So our choices are cooperating with the FBI or hiding from criminals for the rest of our lives. Or paying $700,000 plus interest," Agent Rodriguez added. "Though based on what we know about this organization, even full payment might not guarantee your safety." "What do you mean?" Patricia asked. Agent Rodriguez showed us another document, this one detailing the criminal organization's business model. They deliberately create situations where victims can never fully satisfy their obligations. Interest rates change fees, multiply new charges appear regularly. It's designed to keep people trapped in debt permanently. So even if we somehow raised $700,000, they'd find reasons to demand more money. Almost certainly. Your family has proven to be a reliable source of income, and your brother's cooperation with law enforcement has made you targets for retaliation. From their perspective, you represent both immediate profit and long-term example making. My phone buzzed with another text message, this one containing photos that made my stomach turn. Someone had broken into my apartment and destroyed most of my furniture. My computer equipment, the tools I used to run my design business, had been smashed beyond repair. They're moving faster than expected, Agent Rodriguez said after seeing the photos. This level of immediate retaliation suggests they're either planning to escalate quickly or they're trying to pressure you into paying before we can build a case against them. How quickly could they escalate? I asked. Based on similar cases, anywhere from hours to days. These people operate on business timelines, not legal timelines. They want results fast. Agent Rodriguez received a call on her radio and stepped away from the table to respond. When she returned, her expression was grim. "There's been another development," she said. "Your brother wants to expand his cooperation with our investigation." "What kind of expansion?" "He's offering to provide detailed information about the organization's leadership, their financial operations, and their methods for targeting new victims. In exchange, he wants consideration for reduced charges and protection for his family." "Protection for his family," I repeated. "He's the one who put us in danger." Nevertheless, his information could be invaluable for dismantling this criminal network. The question is whether your family is willing to accept the risks that come with being associated with a cooperating witness. Patricia looked confused. "What kind of risks?" "Cooperating witnesses and their families become high-priority targets for retaliation. The criminal organization will assume you're all working with law enforcement, which makes you threats that need to be eliminated." "Eliminated?" Harold's voice was barely a whisper. "These people have killed cooperating witnesses before," Agent Rodriguez said, matter-of-factly. "If your brother provides testimony that leads to major arrests, your entire family could be marked for assassination." The restaurant felt like it was spinning around me. In the space of a few hours, I'd gone from dealing with family financial drama to facing potential murder by organized criminals. The successful business I'd built, the stable life I'd created, the future I'd planned, had all become irrelevant in the face of immediate survival concerns. "What would witness protection involve exactly?" I asked. "New identities, relocation to a different state, complete severance of contact with anyone from your previous lives," Agent Rodriguez explained. "Your business, your friends, your professional reputation, all of it would have to be abandoned." "Forever?" "Potentially. Depending on how successful we are at prosecuting the criminal organization, you might eventually be able to resume limited contact with your previous life. But there are no guarantees." Harold stood up and began pacing around the empty restaurant, his face reflecting the impossible choice we were facing. "So we can cooperate with the FBI and spend the rest of our lives hiding from criminals, or we can refuse to cooperate and spend the rest of our lives hiding from criminals. Or you can pay the $700,000 and hope they honor their agreement to leave you alone," Agent Rodriguez said, "though, as I mentioned, that outcome is statistically unlikely." "Where would we get $700,000? Patricia asked. "Even if we sold everything we own, we couldn't raise that much money." Agent Rodriguez consulted her tablet again. "Actually, there's something you need to know about your financial situation. The criminal organization's research into your family's assets was quite thorough." She showed us documents I'd never seen before, property records and financial statements that painted a very different picture of my parents' wealth than the struggling business owners they'd pretended to be. "Your antique store inventory is worth significantly more than you've been reporting," Agent Rodriguez said. "Professional appraisals suggest a value of over $400,000. Harold's face went white. "That's impossible." "Is it? Because our investigation found several pieces in your inventory that are worth individual amounts exceeding $50,000. She showed us photographs of items from my parents' store with detailed appraisal information attached to each image. A Civil War-era desk, $75,000. A collection of 19th century paintings, $120,000. A set of antique jewelry, $60,000. "You've been sitting on a fortune while telling your daughter you needed financial help," Agent Rodriguez said. "Why?" Patricia and Harold exchanged glances that suggested they'd been caught in a deception as elaborate as Marcus's gambling addiction. "We didn't know," Patricia said weakly. "You didn't know that items you've owned for decades were worth hundreds of thousands of dollars." "Some pieces came from estate sales," Harold said. "We bought them for much less than their actual value." Agent Rodriguez studied their faces with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to detecting lies. "Or you've been deliberately undervaluing your inventory to avoid taxes, insurance costs, and security expenses." The implication hung in the air like smoke. My parents, who had been accepting money from me while claiming financial hardship, were potentially sitting on enough valuable antiques to pay off most of Marcus's debts. "Even if the inventory is worth $400,000, I said, "that's still $300,000 short of what they're demanding." "True," Agent Rodriguez agreed, "but it changes the nature of the negotiations significantly." She pulled up another screen showing Marcus in an interview room, his face haggard and his hands shaking. "Your brother has been providing detailed information about the criminal organization's operations. With his testimony and your family's cooperation, we might be able to arrest the leadership before they can escalate their collections activities." "How long would that take?" I asked. "Weeks, possibly months, which means your family would need protection during the investigation period. And if the prosecution fails, then you'd be in significantly more danger than you are right now because the criminal organization would know you'd been actively working against them." Harold returned to the table and sat down heavily. "Agent Rodriguez, what would you do if this was your family?" "I'd cooperate with the investigation and accept witness protection," she replied without hesitation. "But I'd also liquidate every available asset to pay as much of the debt as possible before entering the program." Liquidate everything. Your antique inventory, your daughter's business equipment, any other assets that could be converted to cash. Reduce the outstanding debt to a manageable amount, then disappear into witness protection until the criminal organization is prosecuted. "That would destroy our entire lives," Patricia protested. "Your lives are already destroyed," Agent Rodriguez said bluntly. "The question is whether you want to save what's left of them or lose everything to criminals who will never stop demanding payment." My phone rang again and I saw a number I didn't recognize. Agent Rodriguez nodded for me to answer. "Hello. Miss Vivian, this is Agent Thompson, FBI. I'm calling from your brother's interview. He asked me to tell you that he has information about your parents that you need to hear immediately." "What kind of information?" "Information that explains why your family became a target for this criminal organization in the first place." Agent Rodriguez took the phone and spoke briefly with Agent Thompson. When she hung up, her expression had changed to one of grim determination. "Your brother has confessed to something that changes everything we thought we knew about this case," she said. "What did he confess to?" "Your parents weren't innocent victims of his criminal activities. They were actively involved in the identity theft operation from the beginning." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at Agent Rodriguez, certain I'd misheard her. "That's impossible. My parents don't even understand how to use email, let alone run identity theft operations." "According to your brother's confession, your father has been working with the criminal organization for over 2 years," Agent Rodriguez replied. "He's been providing them with information about wealthy customers who visit the antique store." I looked at Harold, whose face had gone from pale to gray. Patricia was staring at her husband with an expression of growing horror, as if she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "That's a lie," Harold said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Marcus is trying to shift blame to protect himself." Agent Rodriguez opened a new section of her tablet showing surveillance photos taken inside my parents' antique store. The images showed Harold meeting with men I recognized from the parking lot, including Tommy and his scarred associate. "These photographs were taken over the past 6 months," she explained. "Your father has been having regular meetings with members of the criminal organization, providing them with customer information and helping them identify potential identity theft targets." "Dad, I whispered, feeling like the world was tilting sideways. Harold's shoulders sagged in defeat. It wasn't supposed to hurt anyone. They just wanted information about customers who might be interested in private sales. Private sales of what? Agent Rodriguez asked. Stolen merchandise, Patricia said quietly, her voice filled with disgust. You've been helping them fence stolen goods through our store. Agent Rodriguez showed us additional surveillance footage, this time from outside the antique store. The videos showed Harold accepting boxes and packages from the same men who had threatened me in the parking lot. Your father has been using the antique store as a front for laundering stolen items, she explained. Expensive pieces stolen from homes and businesses were brought to your store, given false provenance documentation, and sold to unsuspecting collectors. The valuable inventory you mentioned earlier, I said, understanding flooding over me. Those pieces aren't legitimately owned antiques, they're stolen property. According to your brother's statement, approximately 60% of your parents' current inventory consists of items stolen during home invasions that your father helped coordinate. Harold stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger and shame. I never coordinated any home invasions. I just provided information about customers who had valuable collections. Information that was used to target those customers for burglary, Agent Rodriguez said. Your customer database became a shopping list for professional thieves. How many people were robbed because of information Dad provided? I asked. Agent Rodriguez scrolled through a lengthy document on her tablet. At least 37 families over the past 18 months. Total value of stolen items exceeds $800,000. $800,000 in stolen merchandise. Much of it now sitting in my parents' antique store, with false documentation claiming legitimate ownership. My father hadn't just been helping criminals launder stolen goods, he'd been actively facilitating the crimes that created those goods in the first place. The criminal organization was paying your father commission for each successful burglary, Agent Rodriguez continued. Between the fencing operation and the customer intelligence, he was earning substantial money from criminal activities. How much money? Patricia demanded. According to financial records we've recovered, your husband received over $60,000 in payments from the criminal organization last year. Patricia turned to Harold with an expression of pure fury. $60,000! While I've been worrying about keeping the lights on and making mortgage payments, you've been earning $60,000, helping criminals rob our customers. It wasn't that simple, Harold protested. The store was failing. We were going to lose everything. When Tommy first approached me, he offered a simple business arrangement, help them identify valuable pieces and earn commission on private sales. Private sales to people who had no idea they were buying stolen property, Agent Rodriguez said. I didn't know they were planning burglaries, Harold insisted. I thought they were legitimate dealers who wanted information about collectors and valuable pieces. Agent Rodriguez showed us recorded phone conversations between Harold and various members of the criminal organization. The audio quality was crystal clear, and there was no mistaking my father's voice providing detailed information about customers' security systems, daily schedules, and valuable collections. In this conversation from 3 months ago, she said, playing a particularly damning recording, your father is describing a customer's home security system and explaining when the family usually goes on vacation. Harold's voice filled the empty restaurant. The Hendersons have that new electronic system, but they never set it during the day. Martha comes home for lunch every Tuesday and Thursday around noon. They're planning a trip to Europe next month, probably be gone for 2 weeks. That information was used to burglarize the Henderson home while they were at lunch, Agent Rodriguez explained. $37,000 in jewelry and art were stolen. Some of those items are currently in your store's inventory. I felt sick. The successful antique business my parents had used to justify their requests for financial help was actually a criminal front operation. The valuable inventory they'd been sitting on wasn't the result of shrewd business practices, but rather the proceeds of systematic theft from their own customers. "How long have you known about this?" I asked Patricia. "I didn't know," she said, her voice shaking. "I swear I had no idea Harold was involved with criminals." Agent Rodriguez pulled up additional evidence that contradicted Patricia's claim of ignorance. Bank records showing regular cash deposits that coincided with Harold's payments from the criminal organization. Purchase orders for security equipment that suggested knowledge of stolen merchandise storage. Insurance claims that had been carefully structured to avoid scrutiny from law enforcement. "Mrs. Chen, you've been an active participant in laundering the proceeds of these criminal activities," Agent Rodriguez said. "Your signature appears on documents related to the sale of stolen merchandise, and you've been managing the financial aspects of the fencing operation." Patricia's face crumpled as the evidence mounted against her. "I thought the extra money was from legitimate sales. Harold told me we were having a good year because of some estate sale connections he'd developed." "Estate sale connections that involve stealing items from living people's homes," Agent Rodriguez clarified. "The mortgage payments," I said, understanding another piece of the puzzle. "You weren't behind on mortgage payments because the business was failing. You were behind because law enforcement was investigating your criminal activities and you had to stop accepting stolen merchandise temporarily." Agent Rodriguez nodded. "The foreclosure threat was real, but it was caused by your parents' inability to continue their money laundering activities during our preliminary investigation, not by legitimate business problems." Harold sank back into his chair, looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in the past hour. "I never meant for any of this to happen. The store really was failing, and when Tommy offered to help, I thought it was just a business opportunity. An opportunity that required you to betray your customers' trust and facilitate crimes against people who considered you a friend," Agent Rodriguez said. She showed us victim impact statements from families who had been burglarized based on information Harold provided. The emotional devastation was heartbreaking, with customers describing not just financial losses, but feelings of violation and betrayal when they learned their trusted antique dealer had helped coordinate the crimes against them. "These people trusted you," I said to Harold. "They brought their children to the store, invited you to their homes, treated you like family, and you repaid that trust by helping criminals rob them." "I didn't think about the human cost," Harold admitted. "I was focused on saving our business and our house." "By destroying other people's sense of security in their homes," Agent Rodriguez said. "Some of these victims have moved to different cities because they no longer feel safe in their own neighborhoods." My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus, who was apparently being allowed to communicate from federal custody. The message was brief, but devastating. "Dad's been working with them longer than I have. They have recordings of him planning jobs. Mom knew about the money." Agent Rodriguez read the message over my shoulder and nodded grimly. "Your brother's confession includes details about your parents' involvement that we haven't shared with you yet." "What kind of details?" "Your father wasn't just providing customer information. He was actively participating in planning the burglaries, including helping select which items to steal and how to access homes without triggering security systems." She showed us floor plans and security system diagrams that had been drawn in Harold's handwriting. The documents detailed entry points, valuable item locations, and timing information that would allow burglars to work efficiently and avoid detection. "Your father essentially created customized burglary plans for each target," Agent Rodriguez explained. "He used his knowledge of antiques and home security to maximize the value of stolen items while minimizing the risk of getting caught." "And Mom really didn't know?" I asked. "Your mother was managing the financial side of the operation," Agent Rodriguez said. "She was responsible for creating false documentation for stolen items, coordinating sales to unsuspecting buyers, and laundering the proceeds through legitimate business accounts." Patricia was crying now, but I found myself feeling no sympathy for her tears. She'd been living off the proceeds of crimes committed against innocent families while accepting money from me and pretending to be struggling financially. "How much money did you steal from people?" I asked my parents. "We didn't steal anything," Harold protested. "We just provided information and helped with documentation." You facilitated thefts totaling over $800,000, Agent Rodriguez corrected. From a legal standpoint, you're as responsible for those crimes as the people who actually broke into homes. And from a moral standpoint, I added, you're worse because those people trusted you. Agent Rodriguez received another call on her radio and stepped away to respond. When she returned, her expression was more serious than ever. There's been a significant development, she said. Based on your brother's confession and the evidence we've gathered about your parents' activities, we're prepared to offer your family a deal. What kind of deal? Complete cooperation with our investigation, including testimony against the criminal organization's leadership in exchange for reduced charges and witness protection. What would the charges be? Patricia asked. For your husband, conspiracy to commit burglary, money laundering, racketeering, and operating a criminal enterprise. He's looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Harold's face went white. 20 years! For your wife, money laundering, conspiracy, and accessory after the fact. Probably 8 to 12 years. And for Marcus, your son is facing similar charges plus identity theft and wire fraud. Without cooperation, he's looking at 12 to 15 years. Agent Rodriguez paused to let the severity of the charges sink in. With full cooperation and successful prosecution of the criminal organization, we might be able to reduce those sentences significantly. How significantly, I asked. Your parents might face 3 to 5 years each with possibility of early release for continued cooperation. Your brother might face 5 to 8 years, depending on how valuable his testimony proves to be. And me. You're a victim, not a suspect, Agent Rodriguez said. But as a victim, you're also a potential witness whose testimony could be crucial for prosecuting both the criminal organization and your family members. So, I'd have to testify against my own parents and brother. You'd be testifying about the crimes they committed, including the identity theft that victimized you and the criminal activities that put your life in danger. I looked at my parents sitting across from me with shame and fear written across their faces. 2 hours ago, I'd thought they were struggling business owners who needed my financial help. Now I knew they were criminals who'd been earning money by helping other criminals rob innocent people. What happens if we refuse the deal? Harold asked. You face the full charges without any possibility of reduced sentences, Agent Rodriguez replied. And the criminal organization continues targeting your family for collections, except now they know you've been arrested and are likely to cooperate with law enforcement anyway. So we're trapped, Patricia said. You trapped yourselves when you chose to commit crimes, Agent Rodriguez said bluntly. Now the question is whether you want to take responsibility for those choices and help us protect other potential victims, or whether you want to face the consequences alone while criminals continue threatening your family. My phone rang again, and I saw Tommy's number on the caller ID. Agent Rodriguez nodded for me to answer, but this time she activated recording equipment and gestured for several other agents to listen in. Hello, Tommy. Miss Vivian, I've just received some very interesting information about your family's business activities. What kind of information? It seems your parents have been operating a very successful enterprise in partnership with our organization, much more successful than any of us realized. Agent Rodriguez held up a note. He knows about the arrests. I don't know what you're talking about, I said. Miss Vivian, please don't insult my intelligence. Your father has been one of our most valuable business partners for over 2 years. The merchandise he's helped us acquire has generated substantial profits for everyone involved. Those profits came from stealing from innocent people. Those profits came from identifying undervalued assets and transferring them to more appreciative owners, Tommy corrected. Your father understood the business model perfectly. Agent Rodriguez held up another note. Keep him talking. What does this mean for the debt situation? I asked. It means your family's obligations are significantly more complicated than a simple loan repayment, Tommy replied. Your parents have been partners in a criminal enterprise which makes them responsible for the entire operation's liabilities. What kind of liabilities? When law enforcement disrupts business activities, partner organizations expect compensation for lost revenue and increased risks. Your family's cooperation with the FBI has cost our organization substantial money. Agent Rodriguez was typing frantically on her tablet, apparently coordinating with other law enforcement teams. How much compensation? I asked. $2 million payable immediately, plus ongoing payments to compensate for future lost revenue. $2 million. The number was so absurd it felt like play money, but Tommy's voice carried the same casual certainty he'd used when discussing much smaller amounts. That's impossible, I said. No one has that kind of money. Your parents' business partners certainly do, Tommy replied. Criminal enterprises generate substantial cash flow when properly managed. My parents are under federal arrest, I pointed out, which makes their business obligations your responsibility as their next of kin. Agent Rodriguez held up a note. We're ready. Miss Vivian. Tommy continued, you have 48 hours to produce the first payment installment, $100,000 as a gesture of good faith while we negotiate the remaining balance. And if I refuse, then your family becomes a case study in what happens when criminal partners cooperate with law enforcement. The line went dead, but Agent Rodriguez was smiling for the first time since I'd met her. We got him, she said. Full recording of criminal threats, extortion, and conspiracy, plus GPS tracking data that led us directly to their current location. Does that mean it's over? It means the immediate threat is neutralized, she replied. But Miss Vivian, your family's problems are far from over. You're going to need legal representation, and you're going to need to make some very difficult decisions about your future. Within an hour of Tommy's arrest, Agent Rodriguez had connected me with Diana Walsh, one of the FBI's recommended attorneys, who specialized in helping victims of identity theft and organized crime. Diana arrived at the restaurant looking like she'd stepped out of a legal thriller, her confident demeanor and no-nonsense approach, exactly what I needed in my current situation. Vivian, I've reviewed the preliminary evidence against your family members and the criminal organization, she said, spreading documents across our table. Your situation is complex but not hopeless. Complex how? I asked. You're simultaneously a victim of identity theft, a witness to federal crimes, a potential beneficiary of criminal proceeds, and the daughter of people who are facing serious federal charges. Diana pulled out a legal pad and began making notes as she spoke. Our first priority is protecting you from additional criminal liability. Your brother used your identity to commit crimes, and your parents operated a criminal enterprise that generated proceeds they shared with you through gift giving and financial support. I didn't know the money was from criminal activities, I protested. That's probably true, but from a legal standpoint, ignorance isn't always a complete defense, Diana explained. We need to document exactly how much money you received from your family and be prepared to return any proceeds that can be traced to criminal activities. Agent Rodriguez consulted her tablet and provided Diana with additional information. Based on financial records we've recovered, Vivian received approximately $15,000 in gifts and financial support from her parents over the past 2 years. Gifts from criminal proceeds, Diana noted. We'll need to set aside money to repay that amount if prosecutors decide to pursue forfeiture. Forfeiture. The government can seize assets that were purchased with money from criminal activities, Diana explained. If your parents gave you money that came from their fencing operation, you might be required to return it. She showed me a complex flowchart that outlined the legal process for untangling financial crimes involving multiple family members. Your brother's identity theft created legal obligations in your name, totaling over $600,000. Even though the documents are forged, clearing your name will require extensive legal proceedings. How long will that take? Months, possibly years, Diana said. Identity theft cases involving forged business partnerships and real estate documents are particularly complicated because they've been filed with multiple government agencies. What about my business? I asked. Can I continue working while this gets resolved? Diana and Agent Rodriguez exchanged glances that suggested bad news was coming. Your business reputation has been compromised by the criminal investigation, Diana said gently. When news of your family's arrests becomes public potential, clients may question your integrity and reliability. Even though I'm a victim? Unfortunately, yes. Business relationships depend on trust, and being associated with federal criminal charges, even as a victim, can damage professional credibility. Agent Rodriguez pulled up additional information on her tablet. There's another complication. The TechCorp contract you mentioned was obtained partly because your father provided inside information about competing bids. My heart sank. What kind of inside information? Your father had contacts in the antique and art world who gave him access to information about other design firms' proposals. He shared that information with your brother, who passed it along to you without revealing the source. I never asked for inside information, I protested. According to the evidence we've recovered, your brother sent you emails containing details about your competitors' pricing and design concepts, Agent Rodriguez said. You used that information to develop proposals that undercut their bids. Diana was taking notes rapidly, her expression growing more concerned as the scope of my legal problems became clear. This could constitute bid rigging or unfair business practices, even if you didn't know the information was obtained illegally. So I might lose the TechCorp contract. You'll almost certainly lose it, Diana said. Companies don't want to be associated with federal criminal investigations, and TechCorp will probably terminate the contract to protect their own reputation. I felt like I was drowning in quicksand, with each revelation pulling me deeper into legal and financial disaster. The successful business I'd built, the financial independence I'd achieved, the professional reputation I'd earned, were all being destroyed by my family's criminal activities. What are my options? I asked. Diana consulted her legal pad and outlined a strategy that was both comprehensive and daunting. First, we file identity theft reports with all relevant agencies to begin clearing your name from the forged documents. Second, we cooperate fully with the federal investigation to establish your victim status. Third, we voluntarily return any money you received that might have come from criminal activities. How much money are we talking about? Potentially everything your family gave you over the past 2 years, plus any business advantages you gained from the inside information. Total exposure could be $30,000 to $40,000. Agent Rodriguez added another complication. There's also the matter of the criminal organization's ongoing threats. Even with the arrests we made tonight, this network has resources to continue pursuing collections from your family. What kind of resources? Other operatives in different cities legitimate business fronts that can apply financial pressure and corrupt contacts in various industries who can damage your professional reputation. Diana nodded grimly. Criminal organizations often use legal system manipulation as a weapon against victims who cooperate with law enforcement. They might file false lawsuits, make false reports to professional licensing boards, or use identity theft to damage your credit and business relationships. So fighting back legally might make things worse. In the short term, yes, Diana admitted. But in the long term, it's the only way to clear your name and build a legitimate future. Agent Rodriguez's radio crackled with an update from the field teams. She listened to the report and then turned back to us with mixed news. We've arrested 6 members of the criminal organization tonight, including Tommy and his immediate associates, she said. However, we have evidence suggesting the network extends far beyond the people we've apprehended. How far beyond? Multiple states, possibly multiple countries. This organization has been operating for at least 5 years, generating millions of dollars annually through identity theft fencing operations and extortion schemes. Diana was already thinking like a prosecutor. How many other families have been victimized? At least 50 that we know of, Agent Rodriguez replied. Possibly hundreds when we include indirect victims of the burglary and fraud schemes. So Vivian's case is part of a much larger prosecution effort. Exactly. which could work in her favor if she's willing to cooperate fully with the investigation. Diana explained how cooperation agreements worked in federal criminal cases. By providing testimony and evidence against the criminal organization, you could secure immunity from prosecution for any unknowing participation in criminal activities. What would I have to testify about? Your brother's activities, your parents' involvement, the threats you received, and the impact the crimes had on your life and business. Agent Rodriguez added that my testimony could be particularly valuable because I'd experienced multiple aspects of the criminal organization's operations. You're a victim of identity theft, a target of extortion, and a witness to money laundering activities. That combination of experiences gives you unique insight into how this criminal network operates. How dangerous would it be to testify? We'd provide witness protection during the trial period, Agent Rodriguez said. After that, your safety would depend on how successfully we prosecute the organization's leadership. Diana outlined the witness protection process and its implications for my life and career. You'd be relocated to a different state with a new identity until the trials are completed. Your business would have to be suspended, your professional relationships would be severed, and you'd essentially start over in a new location. For how long? Minimum of 6 months, possibly longer, depending on the complexity of the prosecution. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message contained a single photo, my parents' antique store, with broken windows and spray-painted threats covering the exterior walls. They're retaliating already, Agent Rodriguez said after seeing the photo. This is why witness protection exists. What about my parents? Are they safe in federal custody? For now. But they'll eventually be transferred to the general prison population where criminal organizations often have contacts who can reach uncooperative witnesses. Diana was studying the photo of the vandalized store with obvious concern. This level of immediate retaliation suggests the criminal organization is more sophisticated and vindictive than typical street-level criminals. What does that mean for my decision about cooperation? It means you're already a target regardless of what you decide to do, Agent Rodriguez said. Cooperating with our investigation gives you the best chance of long-term safety, but it also requires accepting short-term risks and major life disruptions. Diana pulled out a cooperation agreement document and placed it on the table. This is a standard federal witness cooperation agreement. It provides immunity from prosecution for any crimes you may have unknowingly participated in, but it also commits you to full cooperation with the investigation and prosecution. What constitutes full cooperation? Complete financial disclosure testimony before grand juries and at trial participation in recorded communications with suspects and assistance with any other investigative activities that prosecutors deem necessary. Agent Rodriguez added that cooperation agreements were not reversible decisions. Once you sign this document, you're committed to seeing the prosecution through to completion, regardless of how long it takes or what personal costs you incur. And if I don't cooperate, then you face the legal consequences alone while continuing to be a target for criminal retaliation, Diana said bluntly. As I stared at the cooperation agreement, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed my office number, which was impossible since my building was closed at night. Answer it, Agent Rodriguez said, activating her recording equipment. Hello, Miss Chen. The voice belonged to a woman I didn't recognize. This is building security at your office complex. We've had a break-in tonight and your office was specifically targeted. What kind of damage? Substantial. Computer equipment destroyed, files scattered, windows broken. The perpetrators left a message spray painted on your office wall. What kind of message? Quote, snitches pay the price. Tell the FBI we're just getting started. End quote. Agent Rodriguez was already coordinating a response through her radio, dispatching crime scene teams to my office building. Miss Chen, there's one more thing, the security guard continued. The perpetrators accessed your client files and contact information. They may have obtained personal information about your customers and business partners. The implication hit me like a sledgehammer. The criminal organization wasn't just targeting me. They were preparing to target anyone associated with my business. My clients, my professional contacts, even my suppliers could become victims of retaliation designed to pressure me into paying money I didn't owe. Diana, I said after hanging up, I think I need to sign that cooperation agreement. Within hours of signing the cooperation agreement, FBI forensic accountants arrived to begin a comprehensive audit of my design business. What they discovered was both humiliating and terrifying, revealing how deeply my family's criminal activities had penetrated every aspect of my professional life. Agent Sarah Martinez, a financial crimes specialist, spread out documents across my parents' dining table in their house, which had become an impromptu command center for the investigation. The scope of evidence she'd assembled was overwhelming. Vivian, your business has been compromised in ways you never realized. She began opening a laptop filled with financial records. Your brother didn't just steal your identity for gambling loans. He's been systematically manipulating your business operations for over 18 months. How is that possible? I asked. I handle all my own client relationships and contracts. Through electronic access to your email accounts, social media profiles, and business communications, Agent Martinez explained. Marcus had enough personal information about you to gain access to your digital life, and he's been using that access to benefit from inside information about your competitors. She showed me email logs that made my stomach turn, messages I'd never sent, conversations I'd never had, business relationships that had been manipulated without my knowledge. Marcus had been essentially running a shadow version of my business, using my reputation and credentials while directing opportunities toward himself and his criminal associates. Here's an example from 6 months ago. Agent Martinez said pulling up a message chain between my email account and a potential client. This company initially contacted you about a branding project worth $25,000. The emails showed a normal business inquiry followed by my apparent response, declining the project due to scheduling conflicts. But I'd never seen the original inquiry or sent the declining response. Marcus intercepted the initial contact and responded as you turning down the legitimate work so he could offer the client alternative services through a shell company he'd created. A shell company. Chen Creative Solutions, a design firm that supposedly specialized in legal and professional services marketing. On paper, you were listed as a partner and primary designer. Agent Martinez showed me business registration documents bearing my forged signature, establishing a company I'd never heard of, and committing me to partnership obligations I'd never agreed to. Your brother was essentially stealing business opportunities from your legitimate company and directing them toward this shell operation where he could charge higher fees and provide services using your work and reputation. How much money did he steal through this fake company? Over $100,000 in contracts that should have gone to your legitimate business, but the financial theft is just part of the problem. Agent Rodriguez joined our conversation, bringing additional evidence that expanded the scope of my legal troubles. The shell company wasn't just stealing business opportunities, it was also being used to launder money from the criminal organization's other activities. She showed me bank records for Chen Creative Solutions, revealing deposits and transfers that had nothing to do with legitimate design work. Payments from the antique store, transfers from offshore accounts, cash deposits that coincided with the burglary operations my father had been coordinating. Your brother created this company specifically to serve as a money laundering front, Agent Rodriguez explained. Proceeds from criminal activities were being processed through the shell company's accounts, then transferred to various other businesses and individuals to disguise their origin. And my name is on all the business documents. As a full partner and legal signatory, Agent Martinez confirmed. From the government's perspective, you bear equal responsibility for all business activities conducted under the Chen Creative Solutions banner. Diana Walsh arrived with additional legal counsel, bringing news that made the situation even worse. Vivian, I've been reviewing the contracts your shell company signed, and several of them involve government agencies and regulated industries. What kind of contracts? Design work for a defense contractor that requires security clearances, marketing materials for a pharmaceutical company that must comply with FDA regulations, website development for a financial services firm that handles regulated investment products. Diana spread out the contracts and highlighted specific language that made my blood freeze. Each of these agreements includes certifications that the contracting company has no criminal associations, no conflicts of interest, and no activities that could compromise client confidentiality or regulatory compliance. But the shell company was laundering money from criminal activities, I said. Exactly. Which means these contracts were obtained through fraudulent representations, and the work performed under these contracts could be considered conspiracy to defraud government agencies and regulated businesses. Agent Martinez pulled up additional evidence showing how the fraudulent contracts had been used to justify larger money laundering operations. Your brother wasn't just stealing business opportunities and falsifying your involvement. He was using your professional reputation to gain access to clients and industries that could be exploited for criminal purposes. How much money are we talking about? The shell company processed over $400,000 through various contracts over 18 months, Agent Martinez said. A significant portion of that money can be traced back to criminal activities, including burglary proceeds, identity theft profits, and extortion payments. Diana was taking notes, frantically trying to assess the legal implications of each revelation. This could constitute conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and violation of federal contracting regulations, even if you can prove you had no knowledge of the criminal activities the government might pursue. Civil asset forfeiture. What's civil asset forfeiture? The government seizes assets that were purchased with criminal proceeds or used to facilitate criminal activities, Diana explained. In this case, they could potentially seize any money you earned that can be traced back to business opportunities that were stolen from your legitimate company. Agent Rodriguez added that the asset forfeiture process could extend beyond just money. Your business equipment, intellectual property, even your professional credentials could be subject to seizure if they were used in connection with criminal activities. But I didn't know about any criminal activities. Unfortunately, asset forfeiture doesn't require criminal intent, Diana said. The government just has to prove that assets were connected to criminal conduct, regardless of the owner's knowledge or involvement. My phone rang with a call from TechCorp Industries, the company whose $60,000 contract had seemed like such great news just a few hours earlier. I answered with growing dread. Ms. Chen, this is David Park from TechCorp Legal Department. We need to discuss the contract we signed yesterday. What about it? We've received information suggesting that your company may be under federal investigation for criminal activities. Is that accurate? Agent Rodriguez was listening to the conversation and nodding grimly. The criminal organization's threats about damaging my professional reputation were already being implemented. My family is involved in a federal investigation, I said carefully, but my business itself isn't accused of any wrongdoing. Unfortunately, we can't make that distinction from a risk management perspective, David replied. TechCorp has policies prohibiting business relationships with individuals or companies that are subjects of federal criminal investigations. So you're canceling the contract. We're invoking the morals clause that allows immediate termination for any conduct that could damage TechCorp's reputation or business relationships. The morals clause. Standard language I'd seen in dozens of contracts but never thought would be used against me. Now it was destroying the biggest opportunity my business had ever received. We'll be expecting return of the advance payment within 30 days, David continued, and we'll be notifying our industry partners about the termination and its reasons. I hung up feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. Not only had I lost the $60,000 contract, but TechCorp would be actively damaging my reputation throughout the tech industry. This is how criminal organizations destroy victims who cooperate with law enforcement, Agent Rodriguez explained. They spread information about investigations to professional contacts, creating a cascade of canceled contracts and damaged relationships. Diana was already thinking about legal countermeasures. We can potentially sue for defamation and tortious interference with business relationships, but those lawsuits take years to resolve and cost substantial amounts in legal fees. Legal fees I can't afford because my business is being destroyed, I said. Agent Martinez showed me additional evidence of how the criminal organization was coordinating its retaliation campaign. They've been systematically contacting your clients' vendors and professional associations to spread information about the investigation. How do they have access to my client list? Remember, your brother had access to your email accounts and business files. He provided the criminal organization with detailed information about your professional relationships, specifically so they could be used as leverage if you ever became uncooperative. My phone was buzzing with messages from clients expressing concern about news reports and asking whether they should be worried about their projects. Each message represented another relationship being poisoned by association with my family's criminal activities. Diana reviewed the cooperation agreement I'd signed and outlined what legal protection it would provide. The agreement protects you from prosecution for any unknowing involvement in criminal activities, but it doesn't protect your business or professional reputation from the consequences of being associated with those activities. So I could be completely cleared of criminal liability while still losing everything I've worked to build. That's a real possibility, Diana admitted. Criminal investigations create publicity and professional consequences that extend far beyond the legal proceedings. Agent Rodriguez pulled up new information on her tablet showing the scope of the criminal organization's retaliation efforts. They've filed false complaints against you with professional licensing boards, reported your business to tax authorities for alleged fraud, and contacted your bank to suggest that your accounts might be involved in money laundering. Can they do that? They can file false reports, and it takes time for authorities to investigate and dismiss those reports. During that investigation period, your business relationships and financial accounts could be frozen or suspended. Diana outlined a defensive strategy that was both comprehensive and expensive. We'll need to respond to each false report with documentation, proving your innocence, hire forensic accountants to audit your business records, and potentially sue the criminal organization for defamation and harassment. How much will that cost? Conservatively, $50,000 to $75,000 in legal and accounting fees, assuming the case resolves within 6 months. I calculated quickly. My business was being systematically destroyed. My largest contract had been canceled. My professional reputation was under attack, and I needed to spend $50,000 on legal fees to defend against false accusations. The successful life I'd built was disappearing faster than I could process. There is one piece of potentially good news, Agent Martinez said. Your legitimate business records are clean. All the criminal activity was conducted through the shell company, which means your real business can potentially be separated from the criminal investigation. What does that mean practically? It means if you can survive the immediate financial and reputational damage, your legitimate business could eventually recover once the criminal cases are resolved. How long until the criminal cases are resolved? 18 months to 2 years for federal prosecutions of this complexity, Agent Rodriguez said. 2 years of defending against false accusations, fighting to preserve my professional reputation, and struggling to maintain financial stability while my family's crimes continued generating legal problems. The cooperation agreement protected me from prosecution, but it couldn't protect me from the devastating collateral damage of being associated with federal criminal investigations. My phone rang again this time with a call from Patricia, who was being allowed to make phone calls from federal detention. Vivian, she said, her voice shaking with fear and guilt. I need to tell you something important about the criminal organization, something that could help the FBI's investigation. What is it? I've been recording conversations with Harold and Marcus for months. I knew they were involved in criminal activities, and I was gathering evidence to protect myself. Agent Rodriguez's eyes widened with interest. If Patricia had recordings of my father and brother discussing their criminal activities, those recordings could provide crucial evidence for prosecuting the entire criminal network. "Where are these recordings?" Agent Rodriguez asked. "Hidden in a safety deposit box at First National Bank," Patricia said. "I have documentation showing exactly when each recording was made and who was present for each conversation." Diana was already thinking about how recorded evidence could strengthen our position. If those recordings show that Vivian had no knowledge of criminal activities while documenting the extent of her family's involvement, they could be extremely valuable for clearing her name. More importantly, Agent Rodriguez added, they could provide evidence we need to prosecute the criminal organization's leadership and protect all the families that have been victimized by this network. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a spark of hope. The recordings could prove my innocence while helping bring down the people who had destroyed so many lives. But as Agent Rodriguez began coordinating efforts to secure the recordings, my phone buzzed with another message from an unknown number. "Your mother's safety depends on those recordings staying hidden. Make the wrong choice, and federal prison won't protect her." The criminal organization somehow knew about Patricia's recordings and was prepared to use violence to prevent them from being used as evidence. Even in federal custody, my family remained targets for retaliation. Agent Rodriguez immediately placed Patricia in protective isolation after the threat, while a team of federal marshals secured the safety deposit box containing her recordings. What they found inside was a treasure trove of evidence that would reshape the entire investigation. Patricia had been recording conversations for 8 months, not just with Harold and Marcus, but with members of the criminal organization who had visited the antique store for business meetings. Her foresight in documenting criminal activities had created an evidential goldmine that could dismantle the entire network. "Your mother is much smarter than anyone realized," Diana told me as we reviewed transcripts of the recordings. She understood that her husband and son were involved in something dangerous, and she systematically documented every aspect of their criminal activities. The recordings revealed the true scope of the criminal organization's operations. They weren't just running identity theft and fencing schemes. They were operating a sophisticated money laundering network that processed millions of dollars annually for various criminal enterprises. "Listen to this conversation between your father and Tommy from 6 weeks ago," Agent Rodriguez said, playing one of Patricia's recordings. Harold's voice filled the room. "The Hendersons are planning another European vacation in September. 3 weeks in Italy and France. House will be empty except for twice daily security checks." Tommy's voice responded, "Perfect timing. That Monet reproduction in their dining room is worth at least $40,000 on the private market. Plus whatever jewelry Mrs. Henderson keeps in the master bedroom's safe. She keeps the combination written on a note inside her jewelry box," Harold added. "Saw it when I was there for the estate appraisal last month." "Your father was providing detailed intelligence about customers' security arrangements, valuable items, and personal habits," Agent Rodriguez explained. "This recording alone establishes conspiracy to commit burglary and evidence of premeditated criminal planning." Diana was studying additional transcripts that showed how extensively Marcus had been involved in the identity theft operations. "Your brother wasn't just stealing your identity. He was running identity theft schemes for dozens of other families using information your father gathered about antique store customers." "How many families?" I asked. Based on the recordings, at least 37 families had their identities stolen, using information gathered through the antique store, Agent Rodriguez said. "Your family wasn't unique victims. You were part of a systematic criminal enterprise that had been operating for years." Patricia's recordings also revealed something that changed my understanding of her involvement in the criminal activities. In several conversations, she could be heard questioning Harold about suspicious financial transactions and expressing concern about the source of money coming into their business. "Listen to this exchange from 4 months ago," Diana said, playing another recording. Patricia's voice, "Harold, this cash from Tommy's people doesn't make sense. They're paying us more for storage than those items are worth." Harold's response, Don't ask questions about their business practices. We provide storage space. They pay market rates. Patricia, market rates for stolen merchandise, you mean? I'm not stupid, Harold. I know what this is. Harold, then you know to keep your mouth shut and enjoy the financial stability. Your mother understood the criminal nature of the activities, but felt trapped by financial desperation, Agent Rodriguez explained. The recordings show her repeatedly expressing concern about the illegal activities while feeling unable to stop them. Diana outlined how Patricia's recorded evidence could be used to negotiate better plea agreements for all family members. She documented criminal activities while expressing moral objections to those activities. That combination establishes both cooperation with law enforcement and limited criminal culpability. What does that mean for her charges? Instead of 8 to 12 years for money laundering and conspiracy, she might face 2 to 4 years with possibility of early release for cooperation, Diana said. Agent Rodriguez pulled up additional evidence that the recordings had helped identify. Your mother's documentation allowed us to trace money laundering activities across 6 different states and identify 12 other criminal associates we hadn't known about. 12 other criminals. Members of the organization who were operating similar schemes in other cities. Your mother's recordings provided communication evidence that allowed us to connect criminal activities in multiple jurisdictions. The scope of the criminal network was far larger than anyone had realized. The organization wasn't just targeting families in our city. They were running coordinated operations across multiple states, potentially victimizing hundreds of families through identity theft and burglary schemes. Diana's phone rang with news from federal prosecutors who'd been reviewing Patricia's evidence. The U.S. Attorney's Office wants to offer your mother a cooperation agreement with substantial sentence reduction in exchange for testimony against the organization's leadership. What kind of sentence reduction? Potentially down to 18 months with possibility of serving in minimum security facility and early release for continued cooperation. Agent Rodriguez added that Patricia's cooperation could extend beyond just legal testimony. She has first-hand knowledge of how the organization recruits new criminals' targets, victims, and launders proceeds. That information could help us prevent similar crimes against other families. So Mom could actually help stop other people from going through what we've experienced. Exactly. Her recordings and testimony could be instrumental in shutting down this criminal network permanently. My phone rang with a call from Patricia, who had been briefed on the cooperation agreement being offered by federal prosecutors. Her voice sounded different than I'd ever heard it, stronger and more determined. "Vivian, I need to apologize for everything," she said. "I knew Harold was involved in criminal activities and I should have stopped it or reported it to authorities." "Why didn't you—" "Fear and financial desperation," she admitted. "We were facing foreclosure, the store was failing, and when Harold started bringing in extra money, I chose to look the other way rather than confront the reality." "But you were recording everything." "Because I knew eventually someone would hold us accountable, and I wanted evidence to protect myself and potentially help law enforcement when that day came." Agent Rodriguez gestured for me to ask about specific aspects of the criminal organization's operations that could help their investigation. "Mom, do you know how many other families have been targeted by these people?" "Based on conversations, I overheard at least 50 families in our region alone," Patricia replied. "But Harold mentioned that Tommy's organization works with similar groups in other states. The total number could be in the hundreds." Diana was taking notes about potential victim compensation programs that might be available if the government could seize criminal assets. With this level of documentation, we might be able to recover stolen money and return it to victims. "How much money?" "Based on the recordings and financial evidence we've gathered, the criminal organization has processed over $5 million through various schemes over the past 3 years, Agent Rodriguez said. $5 million stolen from innocent families through identity theft, burglary, and fraud schemes. The recordings Patricia had made could be instrumental in recovering that money and returning it to victims. "There's something else," Patricia said. Harold kept detailed records of every criminal transaction in a ledger hidden behind a false panel in our bedroom closet. Names, dates, amounts, contact information for criminal associates. Agent Rodriguez was already coordinating with the team searching my parents' house. Within minutes, they'd located the hidden ledger and were photographing pages that documented years of criminal activity in meticulous detail. "Your father kept records like he was running a legitimate business," Agent Rodriguez said, showing me photos of Harold's handwritten ledger entries. Every stolen item, every forged document, every payment to criminal associates is documented with dates and details. Why would he keep such detailed records? Probably as insurance against the criminal organization trying to cheat him, and possibly as evidence he could use to negotiate with law enforcement if he ever got caught. Diana reviewed the ledger entries and realized they provided evidence for criminal charges that extended far beyond what investigators had previously known. This documentation shows criminal activities going back 4 years, involving dozens of additional victims and criminal associates. What does that mean for the prosecution? It means the government can potentially file additional charges against the organization's leadership and recover assets to compensate victims going back several years. Agent Rodriguez received an update from the team coordinating arrests based on Patricia's evidence. "We've made 12 additional arrests today based on information from your mother's recordings and your father's ledger. The entire criminal network is being systematically dismantled. Does that mean we're safe now?" "Safer than you were yesterday," Agent Rodriguez replied. "But criminal organizations often have resources and contacts that extend beyond the people we've arrested. Complete safety will depend on how thoroughly we can prosecute the leadership." Diana outlined the next steps in the legal process, which would involve extensive cooperation from all family members. "Your mother's testimony will be crucial for proving the scope of the criminal enterprise. Your brother's information about identity theft victims will help us identify families who need assistance. Your father's detailed records will provide evidence for financial restitution." And my role? As a victim who cooperated with the investigation and provided evidence that led to major arrests, you'll be eligible for witness protection, victim compensation, and assistance with rebuilding your life and business. Agent Rodriguez added that my cooperation had been instrumental in protecting other potential victims. "By working with us instead of paying the criminal organization, you helped prevent them from targeting additional families and gave us the evidence we needed to shut down their operations." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like fighting back had been the right choice. Instead of becoming perpetual victims of an endless extortion scheme, my family's cooperation was helping dismantle a criminal network that had been destroying lives for years. My phone rang again, but this time the caller was Agent Thompson, with news that marked a major turning point in the investigation. "Vivian, we've arrested the criminal organization's leadership based on evidence your family provided. The people who threatened you are now facing federal charges that could result in life sentences." All of them. 17 arrests across 6 states, including the senior leadership who had been operating from legitimate business fronts. Your family's evidence provided the breakthrough we needed to reach the top of the organization. Agent Rodriguez was smiling for the first time since I'd met her. This case is going to become a model for how families can fight back against organized crime through cooperation with law enforcement. Diana added that the successful prosecution could lead to substantial victim compensation. With the criminal organization's assets being seized, there should be significant funds available to compensate families for their losses and help them rebuild their lives. "How much compensation?" "Potentially enough to cover your legal expenses, business losses, and the financial damage caused by the identity theft," Diana said. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to hope that this nightmare might actually have a positive ending. My family's decision to cooperate instead of submit to criminal extortion was helping destroy a network that had victimized hundreds of families, and we might actually recover from the financial and emotional damage we'd suffered. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse watching as the last members of the criminal organization received their sentences. Tommy, the man who had threatened my family with such casual confidence, was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The lead prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chen, addressed the court during sentencing with words that gave meaning to everything my family had endured. This criminal organization destroyed hundreds of families through systematic identity theft, extortion, and violence. The courage shown by victims who cooperated with this investigation has prevented countless additional crimes and ensured that these criminals will never again threaten innocent families. Harold received a sentence of 5 years in federal prison, reduced from the potential 20 years he'd originally faced because of his cooperation and Patricia's documented evidence of criminal activities. During his sentencing, he stood before the court and offered an apology that seemed genuine in its remorse. "Your Honor, I betrayed the trust of customers who considered me a friend," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "I facilitated crimes against innocent families because I was too weak and selfish to find legitimate solutions to my financial problems. I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for the harm I caused." Marcus received 3 years plus mandatory treatment for gambling addiction. His cooperation had been instrumental in identifying dozens of identity theft victims and helping the FBI trace money laundering activities across multiple states. During his sentencing, he specifically addressed me with an apology that brought tears to my eyes. "Vivian, you spent years trying to help me build a legitimate life, and I repaid your generosity by stealing your identity and putting you in danger," he said. "I used your success to cover my failures, and I nearly destroyed everything you worked to achieve. I don't expect forgiveness, but I promise to spend whatever time I have left earning the right to call you my sister again." Patricia received 18 months in a minimum security facility with the possibility of early release after 12 months for continued cooperation with ongoing investigations. Her recordings had been crucial evidence in prosecuting not just our local criminal organization, but several related networks in other states. Mrs. Chen's documentation of criminal activities demonstrated both civic responsibility and personal courage, the judge said during her sentencing. While she bears responsibility for her participation in money laundering activities, her evidence prevented additional crimes and helped ensure justice for dozens of families who had been victimized by this network. Diana had successfully negotiated a victim compensation agreement that addressed most of the financial damage my family had suffered. The government's seizure of criminal assets generated enough funds to compensate victims and provide restitution for families whose lives had been destroyed by the organization's activities. "You'll receive approximately $80,000 in compensation," Diana told me after the sentencing. "That should cover your legal expenses, business losses during the investigation, and the money you lost to identity theft." "What about the emotional damage?" "That's something you'll have to heal over time," she said gently. "But you've survived something that destroys many families, and you did it by choosing to fight back rather than submit to criminal demands." Agent Rodriguez, who had become not just a law enforcement contact, but a friend during the investigation, joined us for coffee after the final sentencing. She brought news about the broader impact of our case on federal law enforcement efforts. This investigation led to the arrest of 47 criminal associates across 12 states, she said. "The techniques we developed for tracing identity theft and money laundering activities are now being used by FBI field offices nationwide. So our nightmare helped other families avoid similar situations." "Absolutely. Your family's cooperation created a playbook for fighting back against organized crime that's already been used successfully in 6 other major cases." I had spent the past 6 months rebuilding my design business from scratch, working with new clients who didn't know about the federal investigation or my family's criminal history. The process had been slow and sometimes discouraging, but it had also been strangely liberating. "I'm earning about 60% of what I was making before," I told Agent Rodriguez, "but every dollar I earn now is completely clean and legitimate. There's no hidden criminal activity, no stolen opportunities, no forged partnerships. How does that feel? Like I'm building something real for the first time in years. I didn't realize how much my success was being poisoned by my family's criminal activities until I started over with complete honesty and transparency. Diana brought news about civil litigation against the criminal organization that could provide additional compensation for victims. We're filing a class action lawsuit seeking punitive damages for the emotional trauma and long-term financial harm caused by the identity theft and extortion schemes. How much additional compensation? Potentially substantial. Criminal organizations often have hidden assets that civil litigation can identify and seize more effectively than criminal prosecutions. My phone rang with a call from Jennifer, who had managed to avoid criminal charges entirely because she'd had no knowledge of or involvement in the family's criminal activities. She'd moved to Portland and was working for a nonprofit organization that helped identity theft victims rebuild their lives. "Vivian, I wanted to tell you about something amazing that happened today." She said, her voice bright with excitement I hadn't heard since before our family imploded. "What happened?" "A woman came to our office who had been victimized by the same criminal organization that targeted our family. She'd lost her savings, her credit was destroyed, and she was facing foreclosure because of identity theft." "How is that amazing?" "Because I was able to help her navigate the federal victim compensation process using everything I learned from our case. She's going to recover most of her losses and rebuild her life." Jennifer's work helping other identity theft victims had given her a sense of purpose that transformed her approach to life. "I'm earning about half what I made in marketing, but I'm helping families survive situations that would have destroyed them without assistance. So something positive came from everything we went through." "Multiple positive things," Jennifer said. "You're building a business based on complete integrity. I'm helping victims recover from crimes similar to what we experienced. Mom's cooperation is preventing other families from being targeted. Even Marcus is participating in prison programs that help other gambling addicts." Patricia was released after serving 11 months, having earned early release through her continued cooperation with federal investigators working on related cases. She moved to a small apartment near Jennifer in Portland and found work as a bookkeeper for a nonprofit organization. "I can never undo the harm that Harold and I caused to innocent families," she told me during one of our monthly phone calls. "But I can spend whatever years I have left helping victims of financial crimes rebuild their lives." "Are you happy?" "I'm at peace," she said. "For the first time in years, every dollar I earn is honest money, and every relationship I have is based on truth rather than deception." Harold's letters from federal prison showed a level of remorse and self-reflection that suggested genuine personal transformation. "I'm participating in a victim impact program where families who were burglarized based on my information can confront me about how my crimes affected their lives," he wrote. "How do those confrontations go?" "They're devastating and necessary," he replied. "I need to understand the human cost of my choices, and the victims deserve the opportunity to tell me how my betrayal of their trust affected their sense of security and peace of mind." Marcus had become involved in prison programs that helped other inmates address gambling addiction and financial crime. His letters suggested that facing the consequences of his actions had forced him to confront the psychological patterns that had led to his criminal behavior. "I'm working with a therapist who specializes in addiction and criminal thinking patterns," he wrote. "For the first time in my life, I'm taking complete responsibility for my choices rather than blaming circumstances or other people for my problems." "Do you think you can stay away from gambling when you're released?" "I think I can stay away from the lies and manipulation that made gambling possible," he replied. "The addiction was really about avoiding responsibility and consequences. Now that I'm facing both, the appeal of gambling has completely disappeared." Agent Rodriguez brought me updates about the ongoing impact of our case on federal law enforcement. The techniques we developed for investigating family-based identity theft have been adopted by FBI field offices in 37 states, she said. Are they finding similar criminal networks? Unfortunately, yes, but they're also developing intervention strategies that can prevent families from becoming victims or help them escape criminal situations before they become as serious as yours. Diana had news about the civil litigation that provided closure to a painful chapter of my life. The class action lawsuit resulted in a settlement that will provide additional compensation to all families victimized by this criminal organization. How much additional compensation? For your family, approximately $40,000. But more importantly, the settlement requires the defendants to fund victim assistance programs that will help other families avoid or recover from similar crimes. I used part of the settlement money to establish a scholarship fund for young entrepreneurs who wanted to start ethical businesses. It seems fitting to use money recovered from criminal activities to help people build legitimate success, I told Diana. What will you call the scholarship fund? The Second Chance Foundation, for people who want to build something honest after surviving difficult circumstances. As I reflected on the year that had changed my life so dramatically, I realized that fighting back against criminal extortion had been the most important decision I'd ever made. Not because it was easy or safe, but because it was the only choice that could lead to genuine healing and positive change. My design business was smaller but more sustainable than before. My family relationships were healthier because they were based on honesty rather than financial manipulation. My sense of self-respect was stronger because I'd chosen courage over convenience when facing impossible circumstances. The criminal organization that had threatened to destroy my family was dismantled permanently. Dozens of other families had been saved from similar victimization. Federal law enforcement had better tools for fighting organized crime. Victim compensation programs had been improved to help families recover from financial crimes. Most importantly, I had learned that being called useless by people who were using me was actually a gift that revealed their true character. Walking away from toxicity, even when it was difficult and dangerous, had been the most useful thing I'd ever done for myself and my family. 1 year later, I stood in my new office space in downtown Denver, looking out at the Rocky Mountains while reviewing proposals for 3 major design contracts. My business had not only recovered from the criminal investigation, it had grown stronger because it was built on complete transparency and authentic relationships. The office walls were decorated with thank you letters from clients who appreciated working with someone who valued integrity above profit. Each letter represented a business relationship built on trust rather than manipulation, creating the foundation for sustainable long-term success. "Vivian, your 3 o'clock appointment is here," my assistant Sarah announced. Sarah was a college graduate I'd hired through my Second Chance Foundation scholarship program, giving her the opportunity to start her career while helping me manage the growth of my business. The appointment was with Rebecca Martinez, Agent Rodriguez's sister, who needed design services for a nonprofit organization that helped crime victims rebuild their lives. The referral represented how my cooperation with law enforcement had created positive connections that extended far beyond the criminal investigation. "Rebecca, welcome to Chen Design Studio," I said, greeting her in our conference room. "Sarah told me about your organization's mission. I'd love to help you develop materials that communicate your impact effectively." Rebecca's nonprofit provided services similar to what Jennifer was doing in Portland, but with a focus on helping families understand their legal rights and recovery options when facing financial crimes. Her organization had grown out of her own experience, helping Agent Rodriguez support victims during federal investigations. "We need branding and marketing materials that explain complex legal concepts in accessible language," Rebecca explained. "Many families don't realize they have options when criminals target them for identity theft or extortion." "That's exactly the kind of project I'm passionate about," I said. "Using design to make important information accessible to people who need it most." As we discussed her organization's needs, my phone rang with a call from Patricia, who had become a regular source of support and encouragement as I rebuilt my life and business. "Vivian, I have wonderful news," Patricia said. "The Victim Assistance Program I've been working with just received a federal grant to expand services nationwide." "That's fantastic, Mom. How many additional families will you be able to help?" "Potentially thousands. We're developing educational materials about financial crimes and recovery resources that will be distributed through law enforcement agencies in all 50 states. Patricia's work had become a form of living amends for her role in the criminal activities that had victimized so many families. Her expertise in financial crime recovery, gained through our family's painful experience, was now helping other families avoid or survive similar situations. "There's something else," Patricia continued. "Marcus is being released next week, and he's asked if he can visit Denver to see your new office and apologize in person." The prospect of seeing Marcus again brought up complicated emotions. I'd forgiven him for his crimes against me, but rebuilding our relationship would require time and careful boundaries. "I'd like to see him," I said, "but I want to meet in a neutral location where we can talk honestly without pressure or expectations." "He understands that rebuilding trust will take time," Patricia said. "He's not expecting immediate forgiveness or a return to our previous relationship. He just wants the opportunity to acknowledge his mistakes and show you the changes he's made." Marcus had spent his incarceration participating in programs that addressed both his gambling addiction and the psychological patterns that had led to his criminal behavior. His letters suggested genuine personal transformation, but I knew that real change would need to be demonstrated through actions rather than words. Diana called with news about the final resolution of legal issues related to the criminal investigation. "All civil litigation has been concluded, and your name has been completely cleared from any association with criminal activities." "What does that mean practically?" "It means you can pursue government contracts, security clearances, professional licenses, or any other opportunities that require background investigations without concern about the criminal charges your family faced." The complete legal clearance was important for the growth of my business, but more importantly, it represented closure on a chapter of my life that had been defined by other people's choices rather than my own. Jennifer called from Portland with news about her work helping identity theft victims. "Vivian, I've been selected to testify before Congress about federal victim assistance programs. They want to hear about our family's experience and how cooperation with law enforcement can lead to positive outcomes." "Are you nervous about testifying?" "Excited, actually. This is an opportunity to help improve federal programs that assist families facing situations similar to what we experienced." Jennifer's testimony would focus on the importance of victim compensation, witness protection, and law enforcement training for handling family-based financial crimes. Her recommendations, based on our family's experience, could influence federal policy for years to come. Agent Rodriguez stopped by my office to provide an update on the ongoing impact of our case on federal law enforcement. "The Chen case is now used as a training example in FBI academies nationwide," she said. "What aspects of our case are most useful for training purposes?" "How family cooperation can dismantle criminal networks, the importance of victim support during investigations, and the techniques for tracing complex money laundering operations across multiple jurisdictions." She brought photographs from recent arrests of criminal organizations that had been identified and prosecuted using techniques developed during our investigation. "Your family's cooperation has contributed to the arrest of over 200 criminals involved in similar schemes across the United States. 200 criminals arrested based on evidence and techniques developed through our cooperation. The nightmare we'd endured had contributed to protecting hundreds of other families from similar victimization." "There's something else I wanted to tell you," Agent Rodriguez continued. "I've been promoted to head the FBI's new Family Financial Crimes Task Force, a position created specifically because of the success of our investigation. Congratulations! What will the task force focus on? Developing specialized responses to criminal organizations that target families through identity theft, extortion, and fraud. We're creating intervention protocols that can help families escape criminal situations before they become as serious as yours. Her promotion represented recognition that family-based financial crimes required specialized law enforcement responses. The task force would help other families avoid the trauma we'd experienced while ensuring that criminal organizations faced swift and comprehensive prosecution. As evening approached, I walked to a nearby restaurant where I was meeting Sarah Rodriguez for dinner. Agent Rodriguez had introduced us 6 months ago, and we developed a relationship that was slowly growing into something serious and meaningful. Sarah worked as a victims' rights attorney, helping families navigate legal systems after experiencing violent crimes. Her understanding of trauma and recovery had been valuable as I processed my own experience with criminal victimization. "How was your day?" she asked as we settled into our table. "Productive and positive," I said. "I'm working with a nonprofit that helps crime victims, which feels like a perfect way to use my design skills for something meaningful. Are you happy with how your business has developed since the investigation?" I considered the question carefully. My current business was smaller than what I'd built before, but it was also more authentic and sustainable. "I'm happier now than I was when I thought I was more successful," I said. "Before, my success was partially built on opportunities stolen from competitors and family money that came from criminal activities. Now every client relationship and every project is completely legitimate." Sarah understood the psychological complexity of rebuilding life after discovering that previous success had been partially based on criminal activity. It must have been difficult to realize that some of your achievements weren't entirely your own. Devastating initially, but also liberating once I started building something completely clean and honest. Now I know that every success is genuine. As we talked about our respective work helping crime victims, I realized how much my perspective on success and family relationships had changed over the past year. Previously, I'd measured success primarily in financial terms and family relationships primarily in terms of obligations and expectations. "What's the most important thing you've learned from everything you've experienced?" Sarah asked. "That being called useless by people who are using you is actually valuable information about their character, not yours," I said. "And that walking away from toxicity, even when it's difficult and dangerous, is often the most useful thing you can do for yourself and the people you really care about." Sarah smiled at the wordplay. "So being called useless led to your most useful decision." "Exactly. My family's criticism revealed their true values and priorities. They needed my money but resented my ability to earn it. They depended on my generosity but treated me like their charity case. That dynamic was never going to lead to healthy relationships. And now my relationships with family members are based on honesty and mutual respect rather than financial dependence and emotional manipulation. We're building healthier connections because we're all taking responsibility for our own choices and consequences." As we finished dinner, my phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus, who was preparing for his release from federal prison. "Vivian, I know rebuilding our relationship will take time and proof that I've changed. I'm ready to do the work required to earn back your trust." I showed the message to Sarah, who understood the complexity of family relationships after criminal behavior. "How do you feel about reconnecting with him?" "Cautiously optimistic," I said. "His letters suggest genuine personal growth, but I'll need to see consistent change behavior over time before I can fully trust him again." That's a healthy approach. You can be open to reconciliation without being naive about the work required to rebuild trust. We walked back toward my apartment, passing the building where my office had been vandalized during the criminal organization's retaliation campaign. The space now housed a small restaurant, but seeing it reminded me of how far I'd come from those terrifying early days of the investigation. Do you ever regret cooperating with the FBI instead of trying to pay the criminal organization? Sarah asked. Never. Paying them would have solved an immediate problem while creating long-term dependence on people who made money by destroying families. Cooperating with law enforcement was harder initially, but it led to genuine resolution and positive change. As we reached my apartment building, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that dinner when I finally stood up to my family's financial and emotional manipulation. My business was smaller but more honest. My family relationships were healthier because they were based on truth rather than deception. My sense of self-respect was stronger because I'd chosen courage over convenience when facing impossible circumstances. Most importantly, I'd learned that real success comes from building something authentic rather than impressive, and that real family relationships are based on mutual support rather than one-sided dependency. The criminal organization that had threatened my family was permanently dismantled. Dozens of other families had been saved from similar victimization. Federal law enforcement had better tools for fighting organized crime. Victim compensation programs had been improved to help families recover from financial crimes. "There's something I want to ask you," Sarah said as we stood outside my building. "What is it? How do you feel about the future now? Are you optimistic about what comes next?" I looked up at the stars visible above Denver's skyline, thinking about everything I'd survived and everything I'd learned about resilience, integrity, and the importance of choosing courage over fear. "I'm optimistic because I know I can survive difficult circumstances and make good choices even under pressure," I said. "I'm optimistic because I've built something genuine that can't be destroyed by other people's lies or criminal behavior." "And personally, are you optimistic about relationships and family?" "I'm optimistic because I've learned to recognize the difference between people who love me and people who use me. That knowledge makes it possible to build authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial or emotional dependency." As I prepared to go inside, I thought about how to end this story in a way that would inspire other people facing similar situations to choose courage over submission to criminal demands. "Sarah, if you met someone whose family was being targeted by criminals for money they didn't owe, what would you tell them?" She considered the question carefully. "I'd tell them that submitting to criminal demands might solve immediate problems, but it creates long-term vulnerability to additional extortion and manipulation. I'd tell them that fighting back through legal channels is harder initially, but leads to genuine resolution and protection." "What else?" "I'd tell them that discovering family members are criminals is devastating, but it's also an opportunity to build healthier relationships based on honesty rather than deception. And I'd tell them that being called useless by people who are using you is valuable information that can guide you toward better choices." I realized that our conversation had provided the perfect ending for my story, one that emphasized the lessons I'd learned and the hope I felt for families facing similar situations. As I headed inside to call Jennifer and Patricia with updates about my business and my life, I felt grateful for the journey that had brought me to this point. The year that had begun with criminal threats and family betrayal had ended with authentic success, healthy relationships, and the knowledge that I was strong enough to survive anything. The dinner where my parents had called me useless felt like a lifetime ago, but I remembered it clearly because it had been the moment I stopped accepting their version of reality and started fighting for my own truth. That fight had been the most useful thing I'd ever done, not just for myself, but for everyone who had been helped by my family's cooperation with law enforcement and our commitment to building something honest from the wreckage of criminal deception. For anyone facing similar situations, my message would be simple: trust yourself, fight back, choose courage over convenience, build something authentic rather than impressive, and remember that being called useless by people who are using you is often the first step toward discovering your true value and potential. Thank you for following my journey through this difficult but ultimately transformative experience. I hope my story inspires you to recognize your own strength and make choices based on your values rather than other people's expectations or demands. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family challenges, financial difficulties, or situations where you had to choose between safety and integrity. Have you ever been in a situation where standing up for yourself felt dangerous but ultimately proved to be the right choice? How do you think families can better protect themselves from financial manipulation or criminal targeting? Please share this story with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the power of cooperation over submission when facing criminal threats. Like this content if it provided value to you, and subscribe for more stories about people who found strength in impossible circumstances. Remember, you have more courage than you realize, more options than criminals want you to know about, and more value than anyone who calls you useless could ever understand. Until next time, choose courage, choose truth, and choose to fight for the life you deserve.